Chapter 748. The entire royal kitchen suddenly fell completely silent. Almost all of the chefs turned toward the servant who was making his way toward Meg with astonishment etched on their faces. How is this possible? Vaser's mouth gaped open, and he could hardly believe his ears. Nandal's eyes turned white, and he directly fell backwards. His disciple was so scared that he hurriedly reached out to support him, extremely flustered. Everyone had been trying to guess who the best dish of the banquet would be, but no one would have thought that the award would go to a completely unknown chef from Chaos City. A tall and thin chef beside Bellman stepped forward with an incredulous expression and yelled, "That's impossible. Steward Tyren, have you made a mistake? How could the best dish of the banquet be won by a completely unknown chef? Isn't His Majesty's favorite food Chef Bellman's?" "That's right. Master has won the best dish of the banquet for 9 consecutive years, how could he lose? Master cooked over 10 dishes today, and he only cooked a few dishes. There must be a mistake somewhere." Bellman's disciples all began to voice their doubts with indignation etched on their faces. All of the other chefs also chimed in agreement. There was only one best dish of the banquet, so it was much easier for them to accept the award being given to a renowned chef like Bellman rather than a young chef from Chaos City. Bellman had also stopped wiping the stove, and a hint of dejection appeared on his face. However, he wasn't too enraged or agitated either. Tyren stopped in his tracks. As a trusted servant of the king, he naturally knew that Bellman had been the king's favorite chef for the past few decades. However, the dark horse that had appeared out of nowhere today was far too powerful. Bellman's reputation seemed to have been overshadowed by the fact that he had won the Best Chef award at the palace banquet. It was understandable that his apprentices had doubts about Bellman. However, it was no small matter to question the king's decision. A serious expression appeared on Tyren's face as he said, "The best dish of the banquet was awarded to His Majesty in front of all of the guests, and there's no mistake about it. All 3 of Mr. Meg's dishes have been praised by the king and all of the guests, and he deserves the best dish of the banquet. He was even summoned to the palace to receive his reward, so there's no question about it. Also, Mr. Meg is not some unknown chef. He is a chef personally invited by His Highness the Second Prince." Tai Luan's words were like a bucket of ice water poured over them. The dining hall quieted down once again. The chef's expressions changed slightly, but they didn't dare to say anything. Since His Majesty had already allowed Meg to go to His Majesty's palace to receive his reward, this was already a foregone conclusion. What surprised the chefs even more was that Meg had actually been invited by His Majesty, the Second Prince. This level of identity was not something that ordinary chefs could casually provoke. A chef from Chaos City had defeated all the top chefs from the Norland continent. This would probably be the most incredible topic in the cooking world this year. Wow! Uncle Meg is too awesome. Uncle Meg is my idol now that he's the chef who cooked all by himself and won the Best Dish award. Lukaka and Luluka were looking at Meg with reverence in their eyes. The Best Dish award was something that they could only look up to, but now that it had been won by Meg, they suddenly felt as if their dreams had become reality. Kalula's mouth was still gaping wide open as he looked at Meg, and praised, "This is probably what they mean by, the true master never shows his true colors. Please come in, Mr. Meg. His Majesty and all of our esteemed guests are still waiting in the palace." Tai Luan made his way over to Meg, and was a little surprised by how young Meg was, but he still smiled as he spoke. Barring any mishaps, this young chef was most likely going to be His Majesty's favorite chef for a very long time in the future. Of course, if the Second Prince were to inherit the throne in the future, then Tai Luan would most likely still be the owner of this dining hall. Meg removed his apron, but didn't appear to be overly excited. He nodded with a smile as he looked at Tai Luan and said, "Please come in." Was he not happy? No, he was overjoyed. Completing the mission was naturally something to be happy about. The sword of Damocles hanging over his head had been removed, and he didn't have to worry about the system's mission anymore. Meg nodded at Kalulu and Kalulu with a smile on his face, then followed Tai Luen to the entrance of the dining hall. The three of them were quite nice. As for the envious and jealous gazes from the other chefs, he simply smiled and accepted them. Pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger was indeed very satisfying. Looking at all of the chefs who wanted to beat him to death, but couldn't do so, he felt even more delighted. When they were about to reach the entrance of the dining hall, Bellman wiped his hands with a dry towel and walked up to Meg. He extended his aged right hand with a smile on his face, and said, "Congratulations, Chef Meg." Meg stopped in his tracks and looked at the smile on Bellman's wrinkled face. After a moment of hesitation, he also extended his right hand and shook Bellman's hand. "Thank you. Even though I didn't get to taste your dishes, judging from the names of your dishes, they must be very interesting. I hope that all young chefs can be as creative as you." "This is a blessing for the world of chefs," Bellman said as he looked into Meg's eyes. "I think so," Meg nodded with a smile as he felt the warmth and strength from Bellman's aged hand. The smile on Bellman's face grew even wider, and he let go of Tang Wulin's hand. "Let's go then. It's quite interesting to win this award for the first time. Of course, once you win more, you won't care about it anymore." "Okay." Meg nodded at Bellman's smile. He was a generous old man, after all. He quickened his pace and caught up with Tai Luen. After exiting the dining hall, Tai Luen led Meg toward the dining hall. Along the way, Tai Luen gave him a few reminders of the taboos and etiquette that he had to follow. After all, this was his first time going to the dining hall, so Meg naturally committed all of these to memory. In a feudal society like this, a single misstep could result in his head being chopped off by the king. Ding! Congratulations, host. Your spicy grilled fish has defeated chefs from all over the Norland continent and received the title of Best Dish. You have also completed a system mission and received a super reward, a chance to recover to your peak power for a short period of time. At the same time, your restaurant has been upgraded to level 3, and you can check all of the restaurant's privileges and upgrades after you return to your restaurant. Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Holy fuck! Meg exclaimed upon hearing the system's words. Tai Luen turned to Meg with a perplexed expression. Chapter 749. A smile appeared on Tai Ren's face. Meeting the king was indeed a big deal. Over the years, he had seen many people whose legs were so weak that they needed someone to help them walk. Meg's reaction was already considered calm. He comforted, "Don't worry, His Majesty is a generous person. Butler Tai Ren is right." Meg nodded in agreement. His heart was still in turmoil. The system's reward was really too explosive. He was a little unable to adapt. He originally thought that the system's so-called surprise reward would be something like a strength point. He didn't expect it to be a chance to return to peak condition. What did peak mean? The Norland continent's strongest knight. The Dragon Slayer. Meg Alex. The peak of life was the peak of the entire Norland continent. System, this peak condition is Meg Alex's peak condition, right? Meg asked carefully in his heart. Could it be the peak keyboard warrior, Meg Shin? The system asked rhetorically. Meg suddenly had mixed feelings. When did the system become so naughty? So what if I'm a keyboard warrior? If it wasn't for Daddy's verbal battle on the keyboard, would you have been created? Would you have the chance to come to this world to sell vegetables? If keyboard warriors could be ranked, then I would definitely be the one standing at the top of the pyramid. I could only quietly feel the loneliness of being invincible. Meg pursed his lips and said in his heart. Then why don't we change the reward to a temporary recovery of Megshin's peak condition? We can even throw in a keyboard. That won't be necessary. I've always been in peak condition. It's just that I don't have an opponent. Meg rejected flatly. What was the use of giving him a keyboard now? Could he use it to kill people? But the system was really getting naughtier. System, how short is this temporary recovery? Meg asked another question that concerned him. This reward was like a protective talisman. It could save his life at a critical moment. You can maintain peak condition for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, the host will return to normal strength. There will also be a period of weakness. Please control the time, the system said seriously. 10 minutes. Do you think I'm Ultraman? Moreover, he will become weak. Meg raised his eyebrows. This was quite different from what he had expected. The time was too short. Host, Ultraman hasn't been proven to exist yet. However, after reading the complete works of Ultraman, the system found that the monsters defeated by Ultraman may have appeared during the evolution of Earth. However, they can only be considered ordinary animals. System, as a gourmet system, how could you be so bored as to watch Ultraman? Meg suddenly felt like laughing. This system went to study the feasibility of braised monsters. Outside of conventional cooking, exploring new ingredients and cooking methods is what a top chef should do. I hope that the host can learn from this system's spirit. Forget it. If you have the time, go and study how to successfully cook a sheep. Meg rolled his eyes and looked at the magnificent hall in the distance. He took a deep breath and quickly followed Tyrone. The female servants cleared away the sumptuous banquet and replaced it with fresh fruits and desserts. Everyone was waiting for the chef who had won the best chef of the palace banquet. A chef who had been recommended by the second prince and had successfully moved His Majesty with his delicious food would definitely become a hot commodity in the eyes of many people. Everyone was curious about what kind of person that person would be. To be able to cook such delicious food, he must be an old man, right? What a pity. All of the female guests were feeling rather forlorn. If he were to announce his identity to the entire Norland continent, he would definitely cause a huge stir. However, someone has already taken the blame for what happened back then, so there's most likely no one who would be implicated by this matter. Irina looked at the entrance with furrowed brows. If he's not an idiot, then why did he accept Josh's invitation to come back to Rodu and win the award of the best chef of the banquet? Irina was still unable to understand Meg's actions. He was clearly no longer as powerful as he had been in the past. No matter how perfect his disguise was, it was impossible for him to be completely flawless in front of so many familiar faces, let alone in a situation where he was the center of everyone's attention. No matter what, I'm going to protect you and Amy this time. I won't let anyone hurt you two again. Irina vowed in her heart. She took a glance at Amy, who was munching on a large apple, and a gentle look appeared in her eyes. Is that Mr. Meg really the person who won the award of the best chef of the banquet? Byron looked at Luna with incredulity in his eyes. Mr. Meg, who had come up with the multiplication table, was a genius who had provided him with the most powerful support and tools for his advancement in mathematics. Even he, who had been immersed in mathematics for several decades, couldn't help but be astonished by this. However, a genius mathematician like him had won the award of the best chef of the banquet. This stark contrast and absurdity made him feel as if he couldn't believe that this was real. Luna nodded with a smile. That's right. Mr. Meg's cooking is the most delicious food I've ever tasted, and he's also the most talented mathematician I've ever seen. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Byron sighed with emotion as he looked at the entrance of the palace with even more anticipation in his eyes. Indeed, he's someone that I can only look up to. Luna thought to herself as she also looked at the entrance of the palace with anticipation in her eyes. Mr. Meg had never disappointed anyone, and this time was no exception. Richard's expression darkened slightly. Even though this chef was invited by Joshua, and he had stolen all the limelight for Joshua, this guy was the half-elf brat's father. If it weren't for Crassus and Joshua, Richard would have killed him on the spot. As for Joshua and Sean, they didn't have any other thoughts at the moment. All they wanted to do was to hold on to the ice kettle and suppress the burning sensation as soon as possible. Chef Meg has arrived. Right at this moment, a thin voice sounded from outside the palace. Everyone's eyes turned toward the entrance of the palace in unison. Tyren was the first to walk into the palace, and behind him, a young man in a black and white chef's robe followed. This man was tall and slender, and his black and white chef's robe was fitting for him. His short brown hair looked very neat, and his handsome face paired with a faint mustache gave him a sense of calm and roguishness. There was also a gentle smile on his face. Is this the chef? Oh my God, he's so handsome. Chapter 750. Meg slowly walked over with a smile on his face. He appeared calm and kind, and his meticulous chef's robe was not stained with oil at all. It was impossible to tell that he was a chef who had just walked out of the kitchen. He can cook good food, and he's able to go to the banquet hall. He's a perfect match. I've always wanted to marry a man who can cook, but the men who can cook are all old men. I didn't expect such a handsome man to exist. Father, will the best chef at the palace banquet be given a noble title? Will he be worthy of our family? The eyes of the young ladies lit up. A chef who could make delicious food that even His Majesty the King praised, and who was also so handsome, was simply too attractive. They could not close their legs to describe their feelings at this time. These shameless women dared to steal my man. Irina's cold gaze swept over the women, and a dangerous glint flashed in her eyes. The women felt a chill run down their necks, and they subconsciously shrank back. They looked left and right, a little confused. Hearing those women's words, Meg's smile became a little smug. There was no imperial examination in this world, but as a chef, he had achieved success in one fell swoop. Even these noble ladies couldn't help but admire him. It seemed that his charm was not to be underestimated. Meg was feeling smug when he suddenly met Irina's cold gaze. It was as if he had suddenly fallen into an Antarctic glacier from a 45-degree desert. The cold feeling caused the smile on his face to instantly freeze. He subconsciously shivered, and immediately put on a serious expression. Holy fuck. Do you have to be so scary? I almost forgot that there's a princess here. Meg's little heart trembled, and he felt like he would be frozen into an ice cube if he were to act recklessly for another second. Humph. At least you know what's good for you. Irina retracted her gaze, but she was still a little annoyed. In the past, he wouldn't even look at other women, but now he was so proud of them. Meg turned his gaze to Amy and flashed her a smile. Although they had been separated for an entire morning, he wasn't worried at all that she wouldn't be full. Everyone in the banquet hall might not be full, but Amy was definitely full. Father. Amy also waved happily at Meg, but she was smart enough not to make a sound. Meg also saw Luna and nodded slightly. The person sitting beside her should be her grandfather, the drunken and long-winded old man in Alex's memory. Byron looked at Meg and sighed. I didn't expect him to be so young. If the multiplication table can be popularized, his name will be forever recorded in the annals of history. The ministers felt the same way. They did not expect Meg to be so young. One had to realize that head chef Bellman was already in his 60s, and he had been the head chef of the imperial kitchen for close to 30 years, yet he had lost to a young man who appeared to be no more than 30 years old. Meg was not nervous at all. After all, In his previous life, he was someone who dared to jump on the stage of a music festival and pretend to be a guest. He could handle this kind of situation. However, he did find a lot of familiar faces in Alex's memory. Many of the ministers in the court had already chosen to side with either Joshua or Sean, but there were also a lot of people who did not choose to side with either of them. They were fence-sitters, or they were on the king's side. In Meg's view, this battle for the throne was a magnified version of a battle for the family's inheritance, except that the losing side would be fatal. It was a pity that he didn't have an elder brother or younger brother to fight for the family's inheritance with him in his previous life. Otherwise, he would know how to participate in such an interesting event. As for the protagonists of this battle for the throne, Meg took a look at the two princes, whose clothes were soaked in sweat and were still holding onto a jug of ice water, and his mood immediately lightened. Josh forced a smile at Meg. Although the current situation was a little difficult, Sean was in a similar situation. Most importantly, the Emperor was happy, and Meg was his lucky star. Meg returned an apologetic smile, but he was actually laughing in his heart. Sean's resentful and angry gaze was completely ignored by him. How dare you two little bitches plot against me back then? The spaciness was just the beginning. According to the system's warning, 3 times the insanely spacey level would change the quality of the food. Tyren led Meg forward before respectfully retreating to the side. Meg composed himself and looked at the king, who was sitting on the throne, and bowed respectfully. Commoner Meg pays his respects to your majesty. The king looked at Meg with a hint of surprise. He raised his hand and said, "No need for formalities. I didn't think that you would be able to cook such delicious and unique dishes at such a young age." Meg straightened up and said humbly, "I am indebted to your majesty. Compared to many of my seniors, I am still very inexperienced. I am truly ashamed to receive such an honor." The king, who had been on the throne for over 40 years, was a lot older than 3 years ago in Alex's memory. His originally black hair had turned gray, and the wrinkles on his face were a lot more obvious. However, he still had a powerful aura that could not be ignored as he sat on the throne. He was like an elderly lion king, still able to protect his territory. Meg was still unsure whether the incident 3 years ago had anything to do with him. However, the way he handled the matter after that proved that he had at least tacitly approved of the incident, and he was even more biased toward Josh, which was why he had used a few demons to suppress the matter. The king shook his head with a smile, and said, "You may be young, but your culinary skills have already reached the pinnacle. All 3 dishes are extremely delicious, so there's no need to be humble." Meg withdrew his gaze, and said in a respectful manner, "You're far too kind, your majesty." Josh put down the kettle of ice water, and the burning sensation in his throat had subsided. He adjusted his clothes, and said with a smile, "Father, Master Meg's culinary skills are already top-notch in Chaos City. Before coming here, he even defeated the #1 chef in Chaos City in a cooking competition, so he definitely deserves to be named the best dish by you." "That's very thoughtful of you, your majesty." The king nodded as he looked at Mag, and said, "Master Mag's culinary skills are superb, and I'm very pleased with all of the dishes that he made. As such, I've decided to reward him with 1,000 dragon coins and appoint him as the assistant chef of the royal kitchen. He can take up the position immediately." A commotion immediately erupted in the palace, and all of the officials wore astonished expressions on their faces. "Your Majesty, I shouldn't be making excuses, but I already have a restaurant in Chaos City, so please forgive me for not being able to stay in the palace." Chapter 751. The entire palace suddenly fell silent, and all of the officials stared at Meg with wide eyes as if they were looking at an idiot. The vice manager position was second only to Bellman in the entire royal kitchen. Bellman had spent 10 years to reach that position, but Meg had achieved it with just 3 dishes. For a commoner chef like him, this was a meteoric rise for the king's vassal. The king's decision had sent all of the officials into an uproar, as this was a very unusual decision. Countless chefs were racking their brains to become the best chef of this royal banquet in order to earn an opportunity to work in the royal kitchen. However, this chef from Chaos City was turning down the king's reward. Furthermore, the reason he used was that there was a restaurant in Chaos City. Are you an idiot? Some of the officials were already hurling vulgarities. This was an invitation from the king of the Roth Empire. How could the king's restaurant in Chaos City be inferior to the customers of the king's? There was no need to think about such a question, but this guy had chosen such an absurd answer. Holy fuck. Isn't he the owner of Carrie's Rotisserie who was selling beef cubes at noon yesterday? Abraham stared at Meg with wide eyes, and almost jumped out of his chair. No wonder he's able to cook such delicious braised chicken and rice. It makes sense that he's a chef who can cook such delicious roast beef cubes. Abraham took a few deep breaths to calm himself down as he looked at Mag with a complex expression. He had thought that two super chefs had suddenly appeared in Rodu, but who would have thought that they would be the same chef? Furthermore, he had run into him again, so he was very lucky. All of Josh's officials were starting to get a little nervous. They had thought that it would be great news for the second prince that Meg had won the best chef of the royal banquet. However, Meg's words could very well infuriate His Majesty, and all of their previous efforts would be for naught. Josh shot a few meaningful glances at Meg. Even though Meg had already told him in advance that he was going back to Chaos City, and he had agreed to that. However, he never thought that Meg would actually be able to obtain the palace banquet's Best Chef award. Furthermore, his imperial father liked him so much. If he could stay in the dining hall and cook for his imperial father every day, it would be extremely beneficial to him. Meg was looking down at the ground with a slightly fearful expression, so he was able to perfectly avoid Joshua's gaze. What a joke. How many customers were still crying piteously for food at the entrance of the restaurant? How could he stay in the palace and be a canary for this old thing? He was afraid that one day, he would not be able to resist putting some poison in the food and kill this family of bad things. Sean's eyes gradually lit up after being tortured by insanely spicy. He challenged the best rotisserie in the world and won. He's so cool. He's fighting for the commoners. He's so compassionate. He's such a straightforward person, he's so cool. Crap, I'm falling in love with him. All of the young women were looking at Meg with stars in their eyes. A man like him was a perfect fit for the image of a hero in their hearts. Coupled with his handsome looks and irresistible food, their hearts were thumping like little fawns. Flirting with girls is the most lethal. Meg listened to all of the young women's praise for him in a resigned manner. He was so perfect that even he was feeling a little embarrassed. Irina was still a little nervous, but a hint of a smile appeared on Meg's face, and she couldn't help but clench her fists as she cursed, "Stinky men are all pig trotters." It's the honor of every chef to be able to cook for His Majesty. This Master Meg was invited here by His Highness. Didn't he inform him of the rules before coming here? He won the Best Dish award, but he wants to open a restaurant in Chaos City instead of staying at the royal kitchen. If news of this were to spread, what would become of the reputation of our Roth Empire? What would become of our dignity as the king? Sean stood up and looked at Josh with an intense gaze. Josh furrowed his brows. Sean's sudden entrance and the two accusations he was trying to accuse him of were quite difficult for him to deal with. Our Chaos City is quite small, but it's still a city that can accommodate Master Meg's restaurant. Chapter 752. Everyone turned to Novin with a hint of surprise in their eyes. As one of the three major powers of Chaos City and the most powerful spatial magic caster on the Norland continent, Novin had come as a representative of Chaos City. Who would have thought that he would be pitting himself against the first prince over a mere chef? Chaos City had only been established for less than 100 years, and was made up of all of the different races on the continent. Even though it had been constantly expanding in the past few decades, and had already become a major power on the entire Norland continent, they had always advocated for peace, and were on very friendly terms with all of the other races. It was no secret that the two princes were vying for the throne, but all of the races had tacitly agreed to remain silent on this matter. Could it be that Novin was trying to express Chaos City's stance and stand on Josh's side? Sean loved to fight, and if he became the king of the Roth Empire, no one knew if the Roth Empire would continue to abide by the peace treaty. In contrast, Josh had a gentle personality, so he was clearly a better choice for Chaos City. Countless thoughts flashed through the minds of all of the representatives as they looked at Novin. To them, a mere chef like Meg clearly wasn't worthy of their consideration. Meg took a glance at Novin, and a thought occurred to him. It appeared that not only had Carol sent him back, he had also informed the principal of this matter. Josh was ecstatic, but he also cast a concerned glance toward the king. His father's health wasn't very good, but he was still the king. All of the officials had to be very careful in choosing sides, and it would be a huge taboo for any other race to infiltrate the royal family. Sean also raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. He had initially wanted to use this matter to make things difficult for Josh, but he didn't think that Novin would step in. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, but his expression remained calm as he said, "Please don't misunderstand, Principal Novin. I'm not trying to belittle Chaos City, it's just that this chef doesn't know what's good for him, and refused His Majesty's reward. He has to be severely punished as a warning to others." "That's not right, Your Highness. Meg is the best chef in our Chaos City, and is highly valued by the city lord. He was the reason why the conflict between the demon race and the dragon race was resolved so quickly. How could he be a nobody? He cooked for the king on his birthday, and is very much in love with the king. He's just unwilling to give up his restaurant. What crime is that?" Novin looked at Sean with a dark expression as he said, "Besides, Meg is a citizen of our Chaos City. If he wants to return, our city will welcome him." Novin's voice wasn't very loud, but every word he said was very clear, and there was no hesitation or doubt in his eyes. Meg's eyes of the goddesses of the world of Chaos City were, and he of course, of Novin of the world. This was of chaos. Although Mag had accepted this reality after coming to this world, he didn't feel any sense of belonging to this world aside from Amy and the restaurant. He didn't even know if he belonged to the Roth Empire or Chaos City. But now, he seemed to have an answer in his heart. Not for anything else, but for that sentence: if he returns, Chaos City will definitely welcome him. Novin actually spoke up for him, and even brought out the entire Chaos City. "I didn't think that the conflict between the demons and the dragons would have something to do with him." All of the officials were looking at Meg with shock on their faces. They had thought that he was just a chef with superb culinary skills, but they didn't think that he would have such an unknown identity. Amy looked up at Crassus, and pouted as she said, "Master, I want to go back to Chaos City too. Our restaurant is there. Jessica, Daphne, Big Sister Aisha, Big Sister Mia. They're all there." Crassus looked at the pitiful Amy, and his heart softened immediately. He nodded without any hesitation, and said, all right, we'll definitely go back." Luna looked at Meg with a concerned expression. She knew that Meg would definitely want to go back to Chaos City, but she didn't think that the situation would become so urgent. Sean looked at Novin. He didn't think that Novin would be so decisive and even bring up Chaos City for a mere chef. What kind of status does this guy have in Chaos City? Why is he so important to Novin? He hesitated for a moment and said, "This matter, isn't the second prince being a little too proactive? This Mr. Mac is the father of my disciple. In Chaos City, you'll have to line up for a meal at his restaurant. If those regulars don't have Mr. Mac's dishes, they'll all die. You're forcing him to stay in the palace, aren't you cutting off our food supply? Crassus looked at Sean with a displeased expression. Sean's eyebrows twitched again. Novin was already giving him a headache, and now, Crassus was even more difficult to deal with. If Crassus were to side with Josh again because of this matter, that would be the most unacceptable thing for him. His heart had already sunk to rock bottom. He's the father of Master Crassus' disciple? What kind of luck does he have to give birth to such an outstanding daughter? A commotion immediately broke out upon hearing that. The father of a once-in-a-lifetime prodigy was a very prestigious title. He already has a daughter. All of the female guests were instantly filled with grief. To be able to give birth to such a beautiful daughter, she had to be an extremely beautiful elf, so their chances were close to zero. Right at this moment, Byron Field stood up, and cupped his fist in a salute toward the king as he said, "Your Majesty, not only is Mr. Meg an exceptional chef, he's also a prodigy mathematician. The mathematical system debate that I've been hosting recently was inspired by the multiplication table that he created. If this table can be popularized, it would be a massive improvement for the Norland continent's mathematics. As such, I believe that we shouldn't punish Mr. Meg severely. Instead, we should treat him with kindness." The entire palace erupted into a frenzy upon hearing that. Lord Byron was the Minister of Education in the Roth Empire, and he was an extremely respected figure in the world of mathematics. Yet, he was saying that Meg was an arithmetic prodigy. Not only did he take home the Best Chef award, but he was also a prodigy mathematician. Everyone was unable to wrap their heads around this sudden change in status, and they were all looking at Meg in a different light. This man really was difficult to see through. This guy. Sean also took a glance at Meg. He had initially thought that this man could be Alex, but that thought had already been completely overturned. Chapter 753. That's enough. The king raised a hand, and the entire palace fell silent. Seeing as Master Meg doesn't want to stay in the royal kitchen, I won't force you. However, the 3 dishes presented to me today are the most delicious dishes I've ever tasted, and they're undoubtedly the best dishes at a royal banquet. The king looked at Meg and said, "Reward him with 1,000 dragon coins and a plaque that reads Best of the Royal Banquet. You may hang it in the restaurant." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Meg extended a grateful bow toward the king. However, he couldn't help but grumble internally, "How can I hang something like that in my restaurant?" The king nodded and said, "Master Meg is an esteemed guest of City Lord Michael, the father of Master Crassus' disciple, and the prodigy mathematician that Byron spoke of, so there's no need for you to leave. You may sit." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Meg said respectfully. He was quite pleased with this reward. He had never been to a royal banquet before, so it was naturally very interesting to be able to spectate from the sidelines. His Majesty actually agreed. All of the officials were quite surprised. However, they were very curious about what was so special about Meg that he was able to garner the support of so many powerful figures. This debate had been sparked by Meg, and Meg was clearly the final victor. Isn't he illiterate? How did he become a prodigy mathematician in just 3 years? Could it be that aside from learning how to cook, he's also been learning how to calculate behind my back? Irina appraised Meg with an appraising expression, and was even more curious about what else he had learned that she didn't know about. Sean wore a slightly gloomy expression, but he still sat back down in silence. He had really hit the nail on the head this time. Not only did he fail to embarrass Josh, he even pushed Crassus and Chaos City toward Josh. In contrast, Josh was unable to hide the elation in his eyes. He was the one who had recommended Meg to him, and he had thought that he was just a chef. Who would have thought that he would be so capable? The group of educators and writers led by Byron Field held high positions, but they thought highly of themselves and had never expressed any intention of taking sides. They were the most fence-sitters in the Roth Empire's bureaucracy. If Meg could infiltrate their inner circle and make them his supporters, it would undoubtedly be a great help to him. Byron sat down. Luna had already poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of him, her face filled with a happy smile. Byron glanced at the cup of tea before turning to Luna with a helpless expression. "Are you that happy just because I helped him? Mr. Meg is someone who loves freedom. Chaos City is more suitable for him. Luna is naturally happy that Grandpa is speaking up for him." Luna nodded with a smile. "I don't think that's the case." Byron took a sip of tea and said meaningfully. Meg cupped his fist in gratitude toward Byron before making his way over to Amy and the others. A servant had already brought chairs over, and he sat down beside Crassus. Meg immediately turned to the two people beside him, and said, "Thank you for speaking up for me, Principal Novin and Master Crassus." Novin looked at Meg, and shook his head as he said, "I should be the one thanking Mr. Meg for being willing to return to Chaos City. There's no need to stand on ceremony, Mr. Mac." Crassus waved a nonchalant hand. "Father." Amy burrowed into Meg's arms with elation. Even though they hadn't seen each other for an entire morning, she still missed him very much. "Good girl." Amy placed Amy on her lap, and stroked her hair with a smile. She took a glance at Irina, and averted her gaze nervously as she looked away. Women were indeed a little scary. The intimate interaction between the father and daughter drew many envious glances. It was every man's dream to have such an adorable and talented daughter. Of course, the women also wished that they were the ones who could sit on such a perfect man's lap. Amy leaned over to Meg, and whispered into his ear, "Father, I think big sister Irina has already fallen in love with you." "Huh?" Meg faltered slightly upon hearing this. "Because she ate all 3 of your dishes, and she looked like she really liked them, so she must have already fallen in love with you." "No woman can resist your delicious food," Amy said with a serious expression. "Little girl." Meg couldn't help but poke Amy's little forehead with a smile. She really was a little girl who dared to say anything. The king gave the final word, and the debate came to an end. "So this is the guy who tricked Tauros and Dracula and caused us to lose a crucial island. That damned bastard." Gajiel, the representative of the demon race, glowered at Meg with a dark expression. The conflict between the two races several months ago had ended in a peaceful resolution, and they hadn't reaped any benefits. It could be said that they had made a wasted trip. Could it be that he's the human who can cook delicious food that Jinx was talking about? Golden Dragon Bruno was also looking at Meg with a hint of surprise on his face. He thought about it momentarily before nodding as he said, "Jinx wasn't lying to me. The food that this human cooks is indeed very delicious. It's just that the portion is a little too small." Mag was also appraising everyone in the palace in a discreet manner. Josh and Sean didn't need to be mentioned, but the 4 portions of spicy grilled fish was a small revenge. Richard had just met Mag the day before, and he was currently glaring at Mag with a dark expression, as if he wanted nothing more than to kill him. Orcs, demons, forest trolls, dwarves, goblins, elves, giant dragons. All of the representatives of the various races had distinctive characteristics. Meg's gaze lingered on the burly man in golden armor who had a dragon tail with fine golden scales trailing behind him. That dragon tail was extremely familiar. Wasn't it the same dragon tail that Mia had transformed into after eating Rigiamo? Could it be that Mia really is a half-dragon born from the union of a golden dragon and a human? Furthermore, there's an extremely high chance that she'll be able to successfully complete her transformation. Meg was rather surprised to see this, and he committed that golden dragon's appearance to memory. If he had the opportunity, perhaps he could find out more about this half-dragon transformation from him. If Mia was willing, perhaps she could even travel to the Golden Dragon tribe to find her father. Of course, if he had already recovered his powers by then he wouldn't mind giving that scumbag a good beating. The entire nation is celebrating the king's birthday, and all of our guests are here to celebrate. Now, please come in and present your birthday gifts. The chief steward announced in a loud and clear voice. The hall instantly fell silent as everyone turned to look at Josh and Sean. It was the king's birthday, so there was naturally no lack of birthday gifts. As for the other birthday gifts, that was just a matter of pride. However, the first prince and the second prince's birthday gifts would garner a lot of attention. Hurry up, you idiot. If we don't present our gifts in time, we'll have prepared for nothing. Chapter 754. Third Prince Yuri has arrived. The attendant's drawn-out voice sounded from outside, and a skinny youth whose head was almost twice the size of a normal person's rushed into the hall. There was still some sweat on his face, and it seemed that he had run all the way here. As he ran, he anxiously shouted, "I'm not late to present a birthday gift to Imperial Father, right?" Everyone in the palace also turned to Yuri in unison with undisguised surprise on their faces. His Highness didn't attend the banquet. I didn't even notice anything amiss from beginning to end. As expected of the prince with the least sense of presence. Most importantly, even His Majesty didn't seem to notice this. All of the officials had peculiar expressions on their faces, and there was even a hint of mockery in their eyes. The first and second princes each had their own strengths, and they had always been on par with one another, maintaining a delicate balance. No one knew which one of them would become the successor to the throne. Meanwhile, the third prince, Yuri, was gradually growing up, and he was constantly being neglected. He was a prince, yet he was obsessed with a lowly craft like carpentry, and there was no way he could gain the support of any of the officials. Aside from his head, he didn't have the slightest bit of influence as a prince in the empire, and even Josh and Sean couldn't be bothered to try and win him over. In their eyes, it would be better to win over a servant of the king rather than a prince with no sense of presence. A running mushroom, Amy murmured to herself as her eyes lit up. Meg couldn't help but burst into laughter upon hearing this. Yuri really did look like a running mushroom, but where had he been all this while? He hadn't even attended the banquet. Meg couldn't help but feel a pang of heartache upon hearing all of the officials' whispers. Ha ha ha, but he couldn't help it. However, it was just as the officials had said, without Yuri, this battle between the two princes would still be very exciting to watch. If Yuri were to join the fray. Was this mushroom head here to be a joke? Meg was even a little concerned that the third prince would step forward and pull out a beloved wooden sculpture for the king as a birthday present. If something like that were to happen to him, Meg wouldn't be surprised at all. The king was a little surprised to see this, and his brows furrowed as he asked, "Where did you go, Yuri? Why are you in such a hurry?" Replying to Imperial Father, this son just went to prepare a gift for Imperial Father. Those fools were too slow, so I came late. Yuri stood still and looked at everyone in the hall before heaving a sigh of relief. He then grinned, revealing two large canine teeth, and said, "But it doesn't seem to be too late. They haven't presented their gifts to Father yet, right? Yuri, I'm not late." The king looked at the heartless smile on Yuri's face, and the displeasure in his heart dissipated. Instead, he was feeling a little sorry for his youngest son, who had barely received any attention from him. He nodded and said, "Have a seat." "Thank you, Imperial Father." Yuri nodded with a smile. He looked around, but couldn't find a place to sit. He was the third prince, yet there was no place prepared for him in this hall. Even the attendants had neglected him. The attendant's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and he hurried over to fetch a chair, but he didn't know where to place it. His Highness the Third Prince's status was naturally honorable, but to say who would be ranked ahead of him was another difficult problem for them. For a moment, they were as anxious as ants on a hot pan. "Little mushroom head, come sit with me," Irina said with a smile as she waved a hand at Yuri. "Whoa." A conflicted look appeared on Yuri's face, and he cast a glance at Meg and Amy, looking as if he wanted to slip away. A cruel smile appeared on Irina's face. "Sure." Yuri shuddered upon hearing this, and he made his way over to Irina with a bashful expression. The smile on his face was even uglier than if he were crying. The attendant hurriedly brought a chair over to Irina, and only then did he heave a sigh of relief. "She really is a smart woman, but it looks like she's treating Yuri quite well, isn't she?" Meg took a glance at Irina. There was most likely no seat in the palace that was more suitable for Yuri than the one beside Irina. Irina's seat was just below Josh's, so Yuri's position as the third prince was just right, so he wouldn't be placed in an awkward position. Yuri sat down beside Irina in a bashful manner, and he took the initiative to scoot his chair over to the side. His legs were crossed, and he wore a nervous expression as he forced a smile onto his face. "Little mushroom head, it's been 3 years since we last met, and your head has grown even bigger." Irina made her way over to Yuri and carefully inspected his head with a curious look on her face. "Other people grow taller because of their bodies, but you've grown taller because of your head?" Yuri leaned back to evade the evil hand that was trying to caress his head. Big sister Irina was a childhood trauma for him, and he even had a feeling that his head had grown so big because she had rubbed it too much when he was a child. Big sister Irina had once lived in the royal palace for a period of time, and she had displayed a great interest in his head ever since he was a child. If it weren't for General Alex's sake, he definitely wouldn't have allowed her to ravage his head like this. Of course, he couldn't resist even if he wanted to. Back when he was still carving wood, he had once dreamed of becoming a knight, and his goal at the time was none other than General Alex, who was at the height of his powers. However, before he had a chance to take the first step toward his dream, news of Alex's death reached him. This was undoubtedly a lethal blow to his dream, and from then on, he only focused on wood carving and some interesting craftsmanship. Irina looked at the scene before withdrawing her hand in the end. She couldn't help but want to rub his head every time she saw it, and she didn't harbor any ill will toward him, she just wanted to rub his head. "Let the birthday ceremony continue. Please present your gift, Your Highness." The attendant received the king's approval, and announced loudly. An attendant quickly strode into the hall with a long tray that was covered with a layer of red cloth. His forehead was sweating, and his hands were trembling slightly, so it was quite clear that the item on the tray wasn't light. Sean stood up and lifted the red cloth, and a golden red light shone out from under the red cloth, causing everyone to narrow their eyes. There was a large golden red sword on the tray, and it was engraved with domineering and regal carvings. The golden red light was extraordinary, and the sharp sword projection made everyone want to avoid it. "What's that?" Everyone looked at the sword with curiosity in their eyes, and it was clear that it was no ordinary sword. Chapter 755. There was an uproar in the hall after Sean said that. The human emperor was the one who revived the human race during the war among species. When the human race was on the brink of extinction, he led the human race to survive the war among species, and made the human race grow stronger and stronger in the decades he was in power, laying the foundation for the human race to become one of the major races on the Norland continent. Because of that, he was also revered as the human emperor, and his sword, the Crimson Flame Sword, had once chopped off the head of a giant dragon, so it was quite famous. After his death, it was rumored that the Crimson Flame Sword was sunk in the Inferno Pond. However, thousands of years had passed, and countless people had risked their lives to enter the Inferno Pond, but they had never found this legendary human emperor's sword. All the rulers of the human race wanted to find this human emperor's sword, but none of them succeeded. Who would have thought that Sean would find it, and give it to the king as a birthday gift. One could only imagine the importance and significance of this gift. All the representatives of the various races didn't look too good. Seeing this sword, many of them were reminded of that lunatic, the human emperor. If it weren't for him, the human race would be just food in the mountains now. The crimson flame sword. The king's eyes lit up, and he slowly stood up from his chair. He reached out to take the sword from Sean's hand, and his old face glowed red as if he had become a lot younger all of a sudden. Back then, he had also used this sword to kill enemies at the border. He didn't expect to get this crimson flame sword when he was old. A warm feeling came from the hilt, and it was as if he wasn't holding a sword, but a ball of fire. It even gave him the urge to pick up the sword and duel with someone. As a king, who didn't want to be like the human emperor? After being in power for several decades, the praise he liked to hear the most was that he was like the human emperor. Now, with the human emperor's sword in hand, the human race was on equal footing with all the other races. On the day of his birthday, all the races came to celebrate, and André felt a sense of pride. André held the sword in his hand and examined it for a long time. He nodded at Sean and praised, "Good sword. As long as you like it, father." Joy flashed across Sean's eyes. He took the sword, put it on the tray, and sat down again. Judging from his father's reaction, the countless efforts he had spent on this sword were not in vain. All of Sean's subordinates naturally took this opportunity to praise Sean, and tried their best to portray him as a filial son with great ambitions. Mag looked at the crimson flame sword. The fact that it was able to remain completely unscathed after being submerged in the lava for 1,000 years indicated that it was an exceptional sword. The king was clearly very pleased with it, and he glanced at Sean as he said, "You're quite smart. You picked the right time for the king to be concerned about his reputation. This is most likely the best sword for the day. You're amazing, brother." Yuri clapped his hands in amazement, but soon said confidently, "But, no matter how special the Scarlet Flame sword is, it's definitely not as special as the gift I prepared." Of. Irina withdrew her hand. She nodded. "All right. If it's not fun, then you know the consequences." "It's going to be fun." Yuri was full of confidence. Josh's expression darkened. It wasn't that he hadn't tried to obtain the human emperor's sword before. It was just that he had never heard of it. Never did he think that it would fall into Sean's hands. He had thought that with Meg's spectacular performance, he would be the star of this birthday celebration. However, he had lost all of his confidence. "Your Highness, please present your gift." The attendant held the Scarlet Flame sword and retreated. The previous attendant continued to shout. Josh rose to his feet. Another attendant also entered the palace with a tray covered with a red cloth. "What kind of treasure will His Highness present?" His Highness presented the Crimson Flame sword. If His Highness's gift isn't special enough, then it's going to be inferior. All of the officials craned their necks to look on with curiosity in their eyes. Josh removed the red cloth, and a faint silver light shone from the tray. There was a perfectly round ball of ice on the tray, and at the center of the ball of ice was a silver Ganoderma. It was emanating a faint silver light as if it were alive. "Father, this is a 10,000-year-old snow Ganoderma that I found in the extreme cold of the north. Snow Ganoderma only appears occasionally under glaciers. Consuming this 10,000-year-old snow Ganoderma can prolong one's life," Josh introduced with a solemn expression. Normal snow Ganoderma was already extremely precious. It was said that consuming it could cleanse countless toxins and prolong one's life. A 10,000-year-old snow Ganoderma was even more unheard of. That was enough to show just how precious this little Ganoderma was. All of the officials' eyes lit up. All of them were in their 50s, and all of them wanted to live for a few more years. If they ate this thing, it would be difficult for them not to live for a few more years. The king took a glance at the 10,000-year-old snow Ganoderma and nodded. "You're very thoughtful, Josh. If it weren't for the scarlet flame sword, this 10,000-year-old snow Ganoderma would undoubtedly be an extremely precious item. It was of a higher grade than the countless treasures in the palace. However, after obtaining the scarlet flame sword, this 10,000-year-old snow Ganoderma seemed a lot more ordinary." Josh nodded and sat down. This 10,000-year-old snow Ganoderma had cost him a lot of money, but he didn't receive any praise from his father. It was still a little hard for him to accept. "I'd like to see if a chef or the scarlet flame sword is more important in my father's heart." Sean glanced at Josh, and the pride in his eyes was not concealed in the slightest. All of the officials saw the king's reaction. This time, Sean's gift was clearly superior. "Your Highness, please present your gift," the attendant called out. There wasn't much anticipation on the faces of the officials. The third prince's birthday gift hadn't been missed year after year, but there was nothing new every year. Even with their eyes closed, everyone could guess that the gift this time would definitely be a wooden carving that he made himself, and it was very likely that he would take it out directly from his pocket. The third prince, who was obsessed with wooden carvings, probably felt that there was no gift in the world more precious than his wooden carvings, so his gifts never changed. Yuri stood up, and his expression was slightly solemn and serious. Four guards used 2 thick logs to carry a 1-meter square box covered with a red cloth into the door. Looking at the guards' footsteps, the box seemed to be a little heavy. "What's this?" All of the officials were really curious now. The size of this gift surpassed all of the previous gifts combined. Chapter 756. Just as everyone was looking on expectantly, the red cloth was lifted, and a black wooden block that was about a meter in size appeared before everyone's eyes. The black wooden block was a single piece, and its surface was very smooth. It was exactly because of this that they could only see some of the original patterns on the wood, and not a single trace of carving. It was just a huge block of wood. "This is the wood that His Highness spent half a year to polish. Could it be that he started from a tree? Even the carving has been omitted." All of the officials who were full of anticipation couldn't hide their disappointment, and felt as if they had been played. However, on second thought, it wasn't normal for them to have expectations of the third prince, so they could only swallow their anger. Meg looked at the block of wood, and raised an eyebrow. "This guy is more interesting than I thought. Is he really trying to piss his father off? This block of wood is quite square." The representative of the demon race, Gil, was already laughing out loud. The other representatives also couldn't hide their smiles. Sean and Josh had both presented extremely rare treasures, and that was enough to show how filial and capable the two princes were. However, the third prince had actually given him a black square piece of wood. What a joke! However, if it weren't for this prince, they would have almost forgotten that there was a third prince in the Roth Empire, and that he was such a stupid fool. "Yuri, what's with this block of wood?" The king's expression was also rather dark. The wood carvings that Yuri had presented in the past weren't very elegant, but they were all very intricate, and that was enough to show his sincerity. However, he had only presented a block of wood today. And he even said that he had spent half a year preparing it. Could it be that she thought he was old and could use such brainless words to deceive him? Furthermore, he had embarrassed him on such an occasion. "Father, this is actually not an ordinary block of wood. This wood has been carefully polished by me, and then painted with a meticulously developed obsidian lacquer. It's harder than iron, and has extremely strong resistance." Yuri gently stroked that piece of wood with his hand, and then jumped onto it. He patted the wood with a smug smile, and said, "Also, look at its height, it's just right for an adult. Sitting on top of it, I can feel a slight chill, and it's very comfortable." So, is this a stool as hard as iron? Gajeel burst into raucous laughter upon hearing this. Andre and his two sons were both very difficult to deal with, and he didn't think that Andre would have such a foolish son. It was indeed a great pleasure to say something that could embarrass Andre. The various representatives began to laugh. Even some of the Roth Empire's ministers couldn't help but laugh along. The Roth Empire is going to become the laughing stock of all the races because of the third prince. There were also some ministers who looked at Yuri angrily, angry that he didn't fight. Yuri, you. The king's beard was trembling with rage, and he had already decided that Yuri would no longer be allowed to participate in any of the royal family's activities. This little guy is still as silly as before. Irina shook her head. Father, why did Mushroom Head give his father a piece of wood? Amy asked with a curious look on her face. Meg contemplated momentarily before replying, he's probably just a fool. Josh hurriedly rose to his feet and said, my third brother is just being filial. It's just that he's still very young, and he's always been obsessed with wood carving, so it's inevitable that he would be biased in his gift. I hope Father won't hold it against him. Sean took a glance at Josh before also rising to his feet and said, Father, my third brother is still very young, and hasn't studied much. Please forgive him, Father. The king's fury subsided slightly as he looked at the two of them. You're the one who hasn't studied much, big brother. I read 5 books every day, and I've already read all of the books in the royal library twice. Yuri retorted with an indignant expression. The king's expression darkened upon hearing this, and he was just about to fly into a rage again. Sean also raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. He had only stepped forward to put in a few good words for Josh because he could see that Josh was putting on a show of hypocrisy. However, not only did Josh not appreciate his kindness, he even dared to ridicule him. He was asking for trouble. The chair is actually only the most common way of using it. Yuri seemed to be completely oblivious to everyone's mocking and enraged expressions as he pressed a corner of the wooden block with a smile, and said, Now, it's time to witness a miracle. Crack! Crack, crack. Along with a cracking sound, the seemingly seamless piece of wood instantly disintegrated into countless pieces of wood. They climbed up from Yuri's feet and enveloped him completely in an instant, forming a layer of wooden shell. Yuri, who was sitting on the wooden block, had transformed into a black giant over 2 meters tall in the blink of an eye. He had an inky black body, a suit of silver armor, and a rather serious expression on his massive wooden head. It was just that he was slightly larger than normal, but he struck everyone with a sense of awe and intimidation. What? The commotion in the hall instantly subsided, and everyone's eyes widened with astonishment as they looked at the wooden giant standing at the center of the hall. A seemingly ordinary square block of wood had turned into a giant in the blink of an eye. This operation was almost dazzling. Could this be magic? But that block of wood really did exist. So this was the gift that the third prince had presented to the king, and everyone was stunned by its beauty. Compared to the wooden carvings that he had presented in the past, this transformative giant was indeed more intimidating. However, why did this wooden giant look so familiar? Isn't that General Alex? A military general asked with an excited expression. It really is General Alex. The entire hall instantly erupted into a frenzy. Alex! A cold light flashed through Josh's eyes at the sight of the wooden giant. This was a face that he didn't want to see again for the rest of his life. Sean was also looking at Yuri with a cold expression. This guy really doesn't know what he's talking about. Irina was a little absent-minded as she looked at the wooden giant. She then turned her attention to Meg, who was also staring at the wooden giant, and pursed her lips. He doesn't look like that anymore. Meg was indeed appraising the wooden giant with a serious expression. It had to be said that Yuri's carving skills were truly exceptional. The carvings on this human head were extremely intricate, and the contours of his face were clearly defined. He couldn't be considered handsome, but he was very memorable. Even though it was only a wooden carving, the resolute look in his eyes still made one want to involuntarily back away. He was the king standing there. So that's what he looks like. He doesn't look like me at all. Could it be that he took my photo and went for plastic surgery? Meg thought to himself, and his emotions were a little complex. Countless memories flashed through his mind, all of which were of his glorious past. Chapter 757. Because he's also your father. Meg looked at Amy with a complex expression as he stroked Amy's hair. He was Meg Shin, but he was also Meg Alex. This was already set in stone from the moment that their memories had been fused. He was willing to shoulder all of the responsibilities that Meg Alex had to shoulder, but he also wanted to live his life in his own way. Meg felt as if he had found his true self as he looked at the wooden giant. Holy fuck. Isn't that a transformer? No, it should be a low-end version of a Gundam. However, Meg still couldn't help but grumble internally. Who would have thought that this guy would be such a prodigy? He's even able to create a Gundam at such a young age. I wonder if he can move. Meg reassessed Yuri in his heart. He was truly stunned by the sight of the wooden block transforming into a wooden giant. It was no less impressive than the special effects in Hollywood blockbusters, and most importantly, this was happening right before his eyes without any special effects. This clearly wasn't a simple mechanism. Instead, a magic formation had been added into the structure. However, how boring was it to be able to split a large wooden block into countless smaller pieces before piecing them together to create a wooden giant. This was just like how Meg couldn't understand his dorm mate's behavior. He was willing to spend days and nights, even forgetting to eat, just to create a Gundam. Was it because the girls outside weren't pretty enough? Meg was quite impressed with Yuri's creativity, but it wasn't a wise decision to associate himself with Alex at a time like this. Regardless of which of his two older brothers took over the throne in the future, they most likely wouldn't go easy on a younger brother who was still obsessed with Alex. Alex! Gajeel abruptly rose to his feet and glowered at the wooden giant. The fury in his eyes was almost tangible, and there was even a dark light emanating from his hands. Irina took a glance at Gajeel with a hint of mockery in her eyes. Old pig, are you afraid of even a wooden giant? Looks like you still remember what happened back then. Gajeel's expression darkened slightly, but a cold sneer quickly appeared on his face as he sat down. Humph, it's just a piece of dead wood. That guy died a long time ago. It seems that some people are still itching for a beating. Irina's expression also immediately cooled as she appraised Gajeel with a frosty expression. The ambush 3 years ago definitely had something to do with the demon race, but she didn't know who was involved. Don't worry, I'll take you to him sooner or later. Gajeel glared at Irina with a vicious smile on his face, but he didn't say anything further. Irina's expression was cold, and she did not say anything either. She glanced at Meg and Amy out of the corner of her eye, but there was a hint of gentleness in her eyes. Big sister Irina seems to know this wooden man. Amy muttered to herself as she looked curiously at the inexplicably angry Irina. Meg hugged Amy gently and did not explain anything to her. The various representatives looked at the wooden figure with different expressions. Everyone was aware of the relationship between Irina and Alex, and Gajeel had already served as an example, so no one wanted to incur the wrath of the elven princess who had stayed in the Wind Forest for 3 years. After all, news had just spread that she had slain a 10th-tier elven magic caster not too long ago. She had never been a stickler for rules, and if she was displeased, she could even attack someone in this hall. I'm not a piece of dead wood, I can move. Yuri's indignant voice sounded from within the wooden figure again. The extremely heavy wooden figure raised its right foot, then raised its left foot again. Even though it appeared to be a little clumsy, it was still controllable. This is a magic core control technique. If it can be used in battle, then it really is a Gundam. Meg's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he looked at the wooden figure. Even though it could only perform simple movements, the wooden figure that Yuri had created was already close to a robot that had been created by a civilization on Earth for thousands of years. On top of that, he was only 15 years old, so he was an absolute prodigy. Yuri's clumsy movements made many people burst into laughter. General Alex was the hero of the Empire, and the entire Empire was in mourning when news of his death spread 3 years ago. Yuri's exquisite carving skills had almost completely recreated General Alex's appearance, and the fact that it had been transformed from a wooden box into something like this was far beyond everyone's expectations. All of the officials were looking at Yuri in a new light. Alex. The king looked at the wooden figure with a complex expression. Your Majesty, I think it's inappropriate for His Highness to sculpt General Alex's appearance. How could such a joke be worthy of General Alex? Right at this moment, a general stood up and yelled. The commotion in the hall gradually subsided, and everyone's expressions gradually changed again as they looked at the wooden figure. Even though they were all stunned by Yuri's creativity, this was General Alex. After all, how could it be made into a toy? No matter how well it was made, it was still just a toy. It was already common knowledge that the third prince was a playboy, but now, he even dared to insult General Alex. He was simply being rude. These guys really are trying to protect their master. Meg took a glance at Slog and discovered that he wasn't one of Alex's former subordinates. Instead, he was Sean's lackey, and it appeared that he didn't want Yuri to steal the limelight from his master. The king's brows furrowed as if he were contemplating something, but also seemed to be a little displeased. Who said this is a toy? This is a suit of armor. Not a toy. Alex is a battle god, and I'm going to use this suit of armor to become a battle god like him. Why can't I use it? Yuri raised his right hand with an enraged expression. Slog's furious expression remained as he turned to Yuri, and he asked, General Alex is the most powerful dragon-slaying knight on the Norland continent. How can you compare a wooden figure to him, Your Highness? Are you going to use this wooden figure to slaughter your enemies like a general? All of the officials in the hall were also looking at the wooden figure with a hint of mockery in their eyes. Yuri was completely powerless, yet he dared to say that he could use this wooden figure to become a battle god like Alex. What an arrogant claim. This wooden figure looked like it was having a hard time even walking. What kind of suit of armor was this? Could it be that it was just a suit of armor that possessed powerful defensive capabilities? In that case, how was it any different from a turtle shell? A mocking smile appeared on Sean's face. A brother like Yuri didn't even have the right to be his opponent. Is it fun to bully a little kid? Meg's brows furrowed as he thought to himself. Just as everyone thought that Yuri was going to give in. Chapter 758. The entire palace instantly fell deathly silent. Everyone stared at the wooden golem with wide eyes, and for a split second, they felt as if the invincible war god had returned. However, the person in the wooden golem was Yuri, not Alex, so how could he dare to challenge Slog? Wasn't that asking for defeat? Slog also faltered slightly upon seeing this. When the wooden golem extended its finger, he almost fell to his knees. However, he quickly came to his senses. Alex was already dead, and the person in the wooden golem was the powerless Yuri. A sense of rage welled up in Slog's heart. He was a deputy general of the Northwestern Military Region, and even though he wasn't all that powerful, if he didn't even dare to accept Yuri's challenge, then he would most likely become the laughingstock of the entire empire, let alone be promoted. Solid turned around and cupped his hands respectfully toward the king as he said, Your Majesty, since His Highness the Third Prince insists on a duel, I would like to make a bold request to have a duel with His Highness the Third Prince in this palace without using any weapons. Would that be possible? Everyone turned to the king. Slog had accepted the Third Prince's challenge, and only the king could decide whether the two of them would accept the duel. Even though Yuri wasn't the king's favorite child, he was still the Third Prince, and not just anyone could bully him. His wooden box had already been mocked by all of the representatives of the various races, and the wooden box had been reconstructed into Alex's body. Now that Slog was going to challenge Yuri to a duel, if Yuri were to lose, then the royal family would be humiliated. Amy looked at the wooden golem with a curious expression. Does Mushroom Head know how to fight? But that birdman of his can't even fly, so he can't defeat Yuri even after transforming into a wooden golem. Could it really be a Gundam? Meg was also quite curious. Even though Yuri was at the height of his youth, he didn't look like an idiot, so he most likely wouldn't do something that would embarrass himself. Little Mushroom Head can run into walls just by walking, yet he dares to challenge someone. What a rare sight. Irina was also looking on with anticipation, and she wasn't worried in the slightest. At the end of the day, Yuri was still the Third Prince. Even if Slog were 10 times more courageous, he still wouldn't dare to injure Yuri. He couldn't bear the consequences of doing so. Father, please allow me to battle him. Yuri withdrew the hand that he was pointing at Slog, and turned to the king with a determined expression. The king looked at the wooden figure and was a little surprised. His youngest son, who had always been lazy, weak, and cowardly, had shown his courageous side today. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "Approved." The attendants quickly cleared the space in the center of the hall, and the ministers began to discuss in low voices. General Solig is a 5th-rank knight. Does your highness really want to fight him? Third Highness, you're neither a knight nor a magic caster. Are you trying to wear out General Sorg by wearing this indestructible wooden golem? Now that you mention it, it's possible. TCH, if only His Highness could be half as hard-working as the first and second princes and not indulge in those dirty tricks, he would be able to do much better. No one believed that Yuri would be able to defeat Slog with this wooden golem that he had created, and there were many who were lamenting Yuri's incompetence. The empty space was quickly cleared, and the two sides stood at the center of the space. Slog's height still only reached up to the wooden golem's neck, and his slightly raised head made him feel a little uncomfortable. The flames of fury in his heart burned even brighter, and he wanted nothing more than to crush this wooden golem's face with a single punch. Please get ready, Your Highness and Master Slog. Don't injure one another, the attendants announced in a loud voice. The commotion in the hall gradually died down, and everyone stared intently at the two of them. Even though they weren't looking forward to the outcome of the battle, everyone was curious to see how long Yuri would be able to last. Slog twisted his neck, and a cracking sound rang out as he glared at Yuri with bulging eyes. He only needed one attack to take care of this brat. Please excuse me, Your Highness, Slog roared as he charged toward Yuri like a ferocious bull. Yuri was the third prince, after all, so no matter how enraged he didn't dare to hurt him in this hall. He was only doing this to impress Sean, and he was a military general, so he naturally couldn't appear weak. As for Yuri, he was a piece of trash to begin with, so there was no need for him to care about his reputation. Slog was striding forward with an imposing aura, and there was a stark contrast between Yuri, who was still standing there like a wooden stake. The outcome of this battle would most likely be decided in a single strike. Gajiel wore a mocking expression on his face. Regardless of whether it was the third prince of the Roth Empire being defeated by a mere military general or Alex's wooden golem being trampled on, these were all scenes that he loved to see. Furthermore, he didn't have to do anything. Good luck, Mushroom Head. Good luck. Amy cheered for Yuri in a quiet voice. She was still a little nervous, and her focused expression was quite adorable. Slog's right hand reached toward the wooden golem's neck, and he leaned to the side as he prepared to suplex Yuri before locking him in place to end this battle. The veins on his muscular arms were bulging. As a fifth-tier knight, his strength was already comparable to that of an ironhide bull, so dealing with a slow-moving wooden golem was naturally a piece of cake for him. A sinister smile appeared on Slog's face. Even though this was only a wooden golem that he could only look up to, he was still very excited to be able to defeat him. He felt as if he could already envision Alex being suplexed by himself. That would definitely be the highlight of his life. Some of the female guests had already covered their eyes. Alex had once been the dream lover of many women. Even though he was only a wooden golem, they didn't want to see him being defeated. A cold smile appeared on Sean's face. He was now rather curious as to whether Alex would also be trampled on like a wooden golem after he was found. Would he be challenged by ants who could only look up to him in the past? That was going to be very interesting. Everyone was waiting for Yuri's wooden puppet to be knocked down by a single blow, and then Solar would be the winner of this duel. However, right at this moment, the wooden golem suddenly raised its right hand, and its movements were no longer sluggish. A crisp crack rang out, and it latched onto Slog's wrist like a bolt of lightning. It then spun around in a fluid motion, and threw Slog forward with a perfect combination of arms and waist. Slog's massive body flew through the air in a graceful arc, and he was slammed heavily into the ground by the suplex. Chapter 759. The entire palace instantly fell deathly silent. Everyone stared at the wooden golem with wide eyes, and for a split second, they felt as if the invincible war god had returned. However, the person in the wooden golem was Yuri, not Alex, so how could he dare to challenge Slog? Wasn't that asking for defeat? Slog also faltered slightly upon seeing this. When the wooden golem extended its finger, he almost fell to his knees. However, he quickly came to his senses. Alex was already dead, and the person in the wooden golem was the powerless Yuri. A sense of rage welled up in Slog's heart. He was a deputy general of the Northwestern Military Region, and even though he wasn't all that powerful, if he didn't even dare to accept Yuri's challenge, then he would most likely become a laughingstock in the future, let alone a promotion. Solid turned around and cupped his hands respectfully toward the king as he said, "Your Majesty, since His Highness the Third Prince insists on a duel, I would like to make a bold request to have a duel with His Highness the Third Prince in this palace without using any weapons. Would that be possible?" Everyone turned to the king. Slog had accepted the Third Prince's challenge, and only the king could decide whether the two of them would accept the duel. Even though Yuri wasn't the king's favorite child, he was still the Third Prince, and not just anyone could bully him. He had already been ridiculed by all of the representatives of the various races for bringing out his wooden box, but the wooden box had been reconstructed into Alex's body. Now, Slog was going to challenge Yuri to a duel, and if Yuri were to lose, then the royal family would be humiliated. Amy looked at the wooden golem with a curious expression. Does Mushroom Head also know how to fight? But that birdman of his can't even fly. How can he defeat Yuri even after transforming into a wooden golem? Could it be that he really is a Gundam? Meg was also quite curious. Even though Yuri was at the height of his youth, he didn't look like an idiot, so he most likely wouldn't do something that would embarrass himself. Little Mushroom Head can run into walls just by walking, yet he dares to challenge someone. What a rare sight. Irina was also quite excited to see what would happen, and she wasn't worried in the slightest. At the end of the day, Yuri was still the Third Prince. Even if Slog were 10 times more courageous, he wouldn't dare to injure Yuri. He couldn't bear the consequences of doing so. "Father, please allow me to battle him." Yuri withdrew the hand that he was pointing at Slog, and turned to the king with a determined expression. The king looked at the wooden figure and was a little surprised. His youngest son, who had always been lazy, weak, and cowardly, had shown his courageous side today. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "Approved." The attendants swiftly cleared the space in the center of the hall, while the ministers began to discuss in low voices. "General Solig is a 5th-rank knight. Does your highness really want to fight him? Third Highness, you're neither a knight nor a magic caster. Are you trying to wear out General Sorg by wearing this indestructible wooden golem? Now that you mention it, it's possible. Tisk, if only his highness could be half as hard-working as the first and second princes and not indulge in those dirty tricks, he would be able to do much better." No one believed that Yuri would be able to defeat Slog with the wooden dummy that he had created, and there were many people who were lamenting Yuri's incompetence. The empty space was quickly cleared, and the two sides stood at the center of the space. Even the tall and burly Solag only reached up to the wooden golem's neck, and the slightly raised head made him feel a little uncomfortable. The flames of fury in his heart burned even brighter, and he wanted nothing more than to punch this wooden golem to the ground and shatter its face. "Please get ready, Your Highness and Master Slog. Don't injure anyone," the attendants announced in a loud voice. The commotion in the hall gradually died down, and everyone was staring intently at the two of them. Even though they weren't looking forward to the outcome of the battle, everyone was curious to see how long Yuri would be able to last. Slog twisted his neck, and a cracking sound rang out as he glared at Yuri with bulging eyes. He only needed one attack to take care of this brat. "Please excuse me, Your Highness," Slog roared as he charged toward Yuri like a ferocious bull. Yuri was the third prince, after all, so no matter how furious he was, he didn't dare to hurt him in this hall. He was only doing this in order to impress Sean, and he was a general, so he naturally couldn't appear weak. As for Yuri, he was a piece of trash to begin with, so there was no need for him to care about what he thought. Slog was striding forward with an imposing aura, and there was a stark contrast between Yuri, who was still standing there like a wooden stake. The outcome of this battle would most likely be decided in a single strike. Gajiel wore a mocking expression on his face. Regardless of whether it was the third prince of the Roth Empire being defeated by a puny general or Alex's wooden golem being trampled on, these were all scenes that he loved to see. Furthermore, he didn't have to do anything. "Go, Mushroom Head. Go for it." Amy cheered for Yuri in a quiet voice. There was a hint of nervousness on her little face, and her focused expression was very adorable. Slog's right hand reached toward the wooden golem's neck, and he leaned to the side as he prepared to suplex Yuri before locking him in place to end this battle. The veins on his muscular arms were bulging. Chapter 760. No. Meg and Crassus rose to their feet almost in unison, and both of them were appraising Yuri with a dangerous look in their eyes. Yuri immediately felt a chill run down his spine, and reflexively took a couple of steps back. These two looked so terrifying, even more so than Irina. All of the officials also turned to look at Amy, who was in Meg's arms, with contemplative looks on their faces. This little girl was still very young, but with her insane aptitude, she was destined to become one of the most powerful beings on the Norland continent in the future. Furthermore, she was already so adorable and exquisite at this age, and she was definitely going to be a great beauty when she grew up. The third prince didn't appear to be very bright, but it appeared that he was very smart. However, she was a half-elf, after all. The biggest question was whether the king would agree to let the third prince take a half-elf as his wife. Of course, it appeared that Meg and Crassus weren't going to let this go. Meg could be ignored, but Crassus' identity couldn't be ignored. Even though it was said that he had already left the Magus Tower and was going to settle down in Chaos City, he didn't say that he was going to leave the Roth Empire. If he didn't want to betroth his disciple to the third prince, then even the king would have to carefully consider the pros and cons. Is that not a good thing? This big head dares to set his sights on Amy. He should be chopped up and thrown into the moat to feed the fishes. Meg glowered at Yuri with a cold expression. No one in this world could take Amy away from him. Otherwise, they would all die. Crassus was also glaring at Yuri with a cold expression. How dare you set your sights on my disciple? Do you think you're worthy of my disciple? Is there anyone in this world who's worthy of my disciple? Why are you being so mean? I'm just worried that big sister Irina wants me to marry her daughter, so I'm just trying to find some idiot. This little idiot is a little dumb, but she's still quite pleasing to the eye, Yuri thought to himself as he looked at the menacing Meg and Crassus. Could it be that this brat took what I said back then for real? How does he know that Amy is my daughter? Irina looked at Yuri with a perplexed expression. The hall fell into an eerie silence. Meg, who was carrying Amy, and Crassus, who was holding a magic caster's staff, were facing off against Yuri, who had a panicked expression on his face. Father, does Mushroom Head want me to marry him? Amy asked innocently as she looked up at Meg. Yuri's eyes lit up. If the little fool agreed, it would be useless even if the big fool and the scary Grandpa Crassus disagreed. Yes. Meg looked at Amy and nodded with a slightly complicated expression. He was just about to instill in her some thoughts of resisting arranged marriages and puppy love. Amy was already looking at Yuri with a serious expression as she said, I don't think I'm worthy of your big head. Besides, I can open my own umbrella when I go out. Poochie, the hall fell silent for a while before someone finally couldn't help but burst into laughter. My God, this little girl is way too adorable. She has such a venomous mouth, but she's still so adorable. Could it be that His Highness' head is already strong enough to shelter someone from the wind and rain? A joyous atmosphere began to spread throughout the hall, especially at the sight of Amy's serious expression. She was clearly saying such hurtful words, but it made him feel as if he was the one holding her in his arms. This was a very interesting feeling. I. Yuri's mouth also gaped open as he looked at Amy and rubbed his own head. It was indeed a little big, but he still had to open an umbrella when it rained. I didn't think that even a prodigy like me would be rejected. Yuri shook his head in disappointment at the sight of Amy's serious expression. It wasn't that he felt sorry for Amy, but rather that there were still people in this world who couldn't see his talent and only saw his head. Is there anything wrong with having a big head? Is that something I can decide? Yuri sighed. He still felt a little dejected from being rejected. You really are my daughter. Irina nodded in satisfaction. As expected of my daughter. Meg was suddenly very gratified as he patted Amy's head with a smile. As long as Amy didn't agree, then everything would be easy to handle. I'm going to marry Father. Father is the best, Amy whispered into Meg's ear. Little girl. Meg's heart was filled with warmth. She was still young, so she didn't know anything about marriage or love. However, she knew who was the best for her, and she wanted to stay by his side for the rest of her life. This feeling of being trusted and relied on touched the softest part of his heart. In the face of 3 consecutive rejections, everyone turned their attention back to the king. The final outcome of this matter still depended on the king's decision. Meg looked into the king's eyes with a determined expression. Your Majesty, please forgive me for my rudeness, but my daughter is not even 4 years old yet. She's still at the age where she's just learning how to speak and how to walk, so she's not suitable to talk about marriage. Yeah. Amy blinked her eyes before singing a line in her baby voice. Crassus also chimed in with a serious expression, Your Majesty, this disciple of mine has only just started learning magic from me. She won't be able to become a master for at least 8 to 10 years, so she doesn't have the time to play woodcarving with the 3rd prince. The king looked at Meg and Crassus before turning to Yuri. Yuri, do you really like this little girl? Yuri crossed his arms in front of his chest with a proud expression. I don't like her anymore. I only like people who like me, and those who don't like me don't deserve to be liked by me. Unless she also likes me, he added. How could there be an idiot like that? Amy asked with a curious expression. Yuri was immediately dejected as he turned to the king in a dejected manner. Father, I don't want this reward. I'll ask you for it next time when I think of something. A hint of disappointment flashed through the king's eyes, but he still nodded in the end. All right, in that case, I'll give you anything you want. Josh and Sean both heaved a sigh of relief in unison, and their wariness toward Yuri was also significantly reduced. An idiot was still an idiot, after all. He couldn't even grasp the opportunity presented to him. Master Crassus, Mr. Meg, please take a seat. Please don't take Yuri's rudeness to heart. The king gestured for Crassus and Meg to take a seat before smiling as he said, if Mr. Meg is willing, you can open a restaurant in Rodu. Master Crassus' original magic lab is in the Magus Tower, so he'll be able to teach better. Chapter 761. Meg took a glance at Yuri. Thankfully, he knew what was good for him. Otherwise, he was already considering whether he should use his one-time recovery ability to send him back to his mother's womb. For Amy, he was willing to do something like that. However, judging from Yuri's performance, he most likely didn't have any ulterior motives toward Amy. After deducting that he was a prodigy, his EQ might not even be as high as Amy's. How could a glutton know anything about love? With that in mind, Meg was a lot more relieved. At the same time, he began to consider the impact that this mecha could have on this world. In a way, this was going to have a huge impact on Meg. He was just preparing to introduce the steam engine, yet this mecha had already been invented. What the fuck? Steam engines were used in basic industries, while mechas were most likely an advanced application based on magic formations. Seeing how Yuri was still standing on the spot after unleashing 2 attacks, it was clear that he had expended a lot of energy. If the high price tag corresponded to an extremely short application time, then it would be hard to say if there was any value in promoting this mecha. However, in any case, Meg could see that Yuri had the potential to become a scientist. This was a type of science that belonged to this magical world. Using magic as a tool, what was the difference between this and what the scientists on Earth were doing? Perhaps I can also change my mindset and not just think that science and technology on Earth are paramount. Meg nodded with a thoughtful expression. Yuri's Gundam had opened up his mind, and perhaps he could also incorporate some things into his magic in the future. Crassus also withdrew his warning gaze from Yuri. Yuri carefully returned to Irina's side and took a seat before sneaking a peek at Irina. He couldn't help but shrink back and sit up even more properly. Little mushroom head, have you forgotten that I told you that I was going to marry my daughter to you? Irina asked with a smile. What? Is that true? I didn't know. Yuri was confused. A cold expression appeared on Irina's face. You dare to forget? Yuri's expression immediately crumbled, and he said in a pitiful voice, Big sister Irina, please spare me. I feel like, my brain is definitely not good enough for your daughter. You are quite self-aware. Irina nodded with satisfaction. Yuri's eyes widened. He thought that Irina was going to force him into a marriage, but he didn't expect that she would let it go so easily. Moreover, it seemed that she was going to let this marriage go as well. Really? Yuri was still a little unsure. You've already lost that opportunity. Irina nodded slightly. That's great. What a pity. Yuri almost couldn't hold back his smile. I hope you'll still think that way in the future. My daughter is the second most beautiful woman in the world. Irina looked at Yuri with a pitiful expression. However, after thinking about it for a moment, he shook his head, and said, "Thank you for your invitation, Duke Abraham, but I'm a little tired today, so I'm going back to rest with my daughter. We're going back to Chaos City the day after tomorrow. If you'd like to come with us, you can come with us." "I see. All right, I'll be sure to come with you the day after tomorrow." Abraham nodded with a forlorn expression, but his voice was filled with determination. Thus, Abraham departed, and Meg carried Amy out of the palace. Luna and a white-haired elderly man were already waiting for them at the entrance. "Teacher Luna." Amy spread open her arms with elation, and Luna accepted her with a smile. "Mr. Meg, I am Byron Field, Luna's grandfather." The white-haired elderly man also stepped forward before extending a hand toward Meg. "Greetings, Master Byron." Meg hurriedly reached out to shake Byron's wrinkled hand. His brown eyes were deep and clear, and seemed to be filled with wisdom. Chapter 762. Meg faltered slightly upon hearing Byron's words. This old man was quite direct, he was inviting him to the debate right away. He took a glance at Luna, who was looking at him with a nervous expression, and nodded with a smile. "You're far too kind, Master Byron. I only know a little about the debate. If you don't mind, I'd be happy to attend." Byron smiled. "All right, tomorrow's debate will be held at Carlow Church. It will start at 10 a.m. I'll be there on time." Meg nodded. "Lord Crassus, long time no see." Byron let go of Meg's hand and turned to greet Crassus. "Byron, it's time for you to retire, you old man. A bunch of old men quarreling all day long. Even if you don't find it annoying, the clergy in the church will find you annoying." Byron was not annoyed. He smiled and said, "When it comes to academic matters, the more you argue, the clearer it becomes. Forget it, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Talking to you is the most boring. Let's go." Crassus waved his hand disinterestedly. Then he looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Mac, little Amy, I'm going to find an old friend. You can go back first. I'll look for you again." With that, he turned and left. "Luna, you can go back first," Byron reminded Luna. Then he nodded slightly at Meg and Amy. He turned and walked toward an old man. Meg helplessly took Amy from Luna's arms. "Mr. Meg, thank you." Luna looked at Meg and said sincerely. Meg smiled and shook his head. "Teacher Luna, you're welcome." "It's nothing." Luna had done a lot of things for Amy. Naturally, he would not refuse such a favor. Moreover, he was the one who had created the multiplication table. Now that he was in Chang'an, he could not just run away from it. Amy looked at Luna, and hesitantly asked, "Teacher Luna, will you return to Chaos City after you go home this time?" "Of course, Teacher Luna took 5 days off and will be going back with Amy the day after tomorrow," Luna said in shock. "Really?" Amy's eyes immediately lit up, but she shook her head after some thought. "But Teacher Luna's home is here. Your parents are also here. If you go to Chaos City, you won't be able to see them." Luna's heart warmed. She pinched Amy's cheek with a smile, and shook her head as she said, "It's all right. I'm an adult now. Chaos City is under the care of you little cuties. I can't bear to leave." Amy nodded, and seriously said, "Also, if Teacher Luna misses home, I can lend you my father. He's super warm, so you won't feel lonely." Luna looked up at Meg, and blushed slightly. She nodded with a smile, and said, "Sure. No, I have to stand my ground." Meg's face was not red, and his heart was not racing. He was not affected by anything. He was now being targeted by Irina, so if anything happened, he was more worried about his own safety. After bidding farewell to Luna, Meg carried Amy out of the palace. The horse-drawn carriage from the second prince's manor was already waiting for them. The steward who had sent them to the palace earlier came up to them with a smile, and respectfully said, "Congratulations, Master Meg, for winning the Best Dish Award." "Thank you." Meg nodded politely. The steward continued in a respectful manner, "Your belongings have all been packed, and they've been sent back to your manor. Would you like to go out for a walk or go straight back to your manor?" "I'm a little tired, I'll go straight back." Meg looked up at the sky. It was still clear in the morning, but there were already many dark clouds in the sky now. It looked a little gloomy, and it made people feel a little uncomfortable. It seemed that there was going to be a heavy rain today. "All right." The steward nodded, and after Meg and Amy got into the carriage, it drove out of the palace. Meg lifted a corner of the curtain, and looked out at the majestic palace that kept passing by. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. The battle between the two dragons is going to be a good show. I just don't know who will emerge victorious in the end. Should I get involved? Yuri. Interesting. Father, what are you smiling about? Amy looked at Meg curiously. I'm smiling. I have a good baby. Meg retracted his gaze, and looked at Amy with a smile. In the royal palace's conference hall, a long table was placed in the center of the hall. King Andre sat at the head of the table, while Sean and Josh sat on his left and right as usual. The representatives of the various races sat on either side of the long table, and no one sat at the end. The atmosphere in the silent hall was a little tense. Everyone sat facing each other like that, and no one had the intention to speak first. After a long silence, Andre looked at everyone, and said in a low voice, "Although I invited all of you here in the name of my birthday celebration, the main purpose is to discuss the re-signing of the peace treaty in 3 months' time. Is the treaty from 100 years ago still suitable for the current continent? As for what terms should be deleted or added, I hope all of you can voice out your demands, and then we'll discuss and vote on it. 100 years ago, all of our races signed a peace treaty in order to end the war among species, and the Norland continent has enjoyed relative peace for 100 years. The elven race is willing to renew the peace treaty." Irina raised a hand, and looked at the orc and demon representatives with a cold expression as she said, "However, I'm warning you, if any other race dares to capture and sell our elven brethren, it will be seen as a declaration of war against the elven race. I'll do everything in my power to save them, and then kill those bastards." Gajiel and Sanha's hearts shuddered in unison. As expected, this woman was still the most terrifying woman in the world, but they still had to force themselves to remain calm. "Seeing as she's the hope of the elven race, then I'll crush all of them today," Gajiel thought to himself as he withdrew his gaze. The dwarf representative turned to Gajiel and said, "Our dwarven race is also willing to renew the peace treaty. However, before that, we strongly request that the demon race return all of the territory that they forcibly occupied over the past few years to us, and also add additional terms to the treaty to punish those who forcibly occupy other races' territories. The goblin race has no objections. If everyone is willing to sign, then we'll sign. If no one is willing to sign, then we won't sign either." A sinister smile appeared on the dark green goblin representative's face, revealing a mouthful of sharp fangs. Bruno wore a nonchalant expression as he said, "Our giant dragon race is also willing to sign, but we can't afford to lose any of our territory." Chapter 763. The palace banquet this time is really unexpected. I didn't think that someone would be able to snatch the Best Dish Award from Master Bellman. Shouldn't the chef who won the Best Dish Award be the one who refused His Majesty's invitation and gave up on the position of assistant manager of the royal kitchen? Is there something wrong with that guy's head? How could he give up on such an opportunity? Once Bellman leaves in a few years, he'll become the manager of the royal kitchen. In the dining hall, the chefs who had yet to disperse were chatting softly among themselves as they packed up their things. Even though they didn't manage to win the Best Dish award as usual, compared to the past, there were many more things that could be talked about in the circle of chefs for an entire year. That chef by the name of Meg was like a dark horse who had completely stirred up the waters of the royal kitchen. Legends about him would most likely continue to linger for many years to come. That guy must know that he's no match for Master, so he didn't dare to enter the royal kitchen, the chubby chef beside Bellman said with a confident expression. However, none of the disciples around Bellman echoed his words. Instead, complex and dejected expressions appeared on their faces. A young man looked at Bellman, who was tidying up his tools, and asked in a timid manner, "Master, what do you think of this?" Bellman slowly closed the lid of the box, and a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the sky. He's a true chef. Opening a restaurant is such a wonderful thing. There are so many customers coming and going every day. Perhaps that's the true reason why he's able to create so many different dishes. Father, what do we need to do today? Meg and Amy returned to the second prince's manor, and Amy immediately turned to Meg with an expectant look on her face. Meg thought about it for a moment before replying with a smile, "There's nothing else that needs to be done today." "Amy, why don't you accompany me to make ice cream cake?" "Ice cream cake?" Amy turned to Meg with a perplexed expression. Wasn't ice cream just ice cream? What was a cake? "Let's go. You'll find out soon enough." Meg picked her up with a smile, and then asked the butler to move all the things back, and help him arrange a separate and clean little kitchen. The butler naturally wasn't aware of what had happened in the palace, but he knew that Meg had won the Best Dish award, and had also been personally rewarded by His Majesty. He was the second prince and even His Majesty's favorite chef, so he naturally had to curry favor with him. So he immediately went to make arrangements for Meg's request. News of Meg receiving the Best Dish award quickly spread to the kitchen in the second prince's manor, and it naturally created quite a stir. This chef from Chaos City had actually ascended to the throne that all of the chefs in the Roth Empire wanted to ascend to, and they were still doubting his culinary skills prior to this. On this day, the name Meg spread throughout the world of chefs. Even though he still wasn't the #1 chef in the world, he was already beginning to make a name for himself. Everyone knew that an incredible chef had appeared in Chaos City, and even the king of the Roth Empire was full of praise for him. Meg was still quite concerned about these false accolades. After all, the main objective of the system was to make him the god of cookery, and then make all of the chefs come to him to punish him. Meg had already seen through this little trick, but he just didn't want to expose it. What he had to do was very simple. While constantly improving his culinary skills, he had to constantly raise the stakes for duels with him so that most chefs wouldn't dare to challenge him. At the same time, he had to make all of the chefs who thought they were capable of challenging him to a duel. Meg was confident that there wouldn't be many chefs on the Norland continent who would challenge him to a duel in no time. When that time came, he would most likely have completed all of the system's main missions and reached the pinnacle of his life. "System, give me the ingredients I need to make an ice cream cake," Meg said internally. The system has already stated that it won't provide you with any ingredients for this trip to Rodu. If you need any ingredients, you have to find them on the spot. The system's serious voice sounded. "System, I've already completed the mission for this trip to Rodu. The restrictions you mentioned earlier are within the scope of the mission, and I'm asking for ingredients for myself. Is there any connection between the two?" Meg pursed his lips with a question of his own. Well. The system hesitated. "I earned 1,000 dragon coins today, but I don't know how to spend them. There seems to be a lot of good stuff to buy in Rodu. How about?" Meg was a little conflicted. Ding. "The ingredients you need have been prepared and have been sent to the first level of the cabinet. If there's anything you need, please feel free to let me know." The system will provide you with the best service. The system's gentle voice sounded, and an image of a smiling stewardess appeared in Rodu's mind. Do you think your voice is worthy of this image? Meg couldn't help but roll his eyes. He opened the cabinet to find that all types of ingredients were indeed available. As he loaded the ingredients into the ice cream cake machine, he asked internally, "System, do you know how to make Gundam?" If you're talking about an assembled toy, then that's not an issue. I'm talking about a real Gundam. I don't have high requirements, just like the one that the big-headed prince made. Do you know how to make one? The system knows nothing about magic. I'm unable to learn such non-scientific things, so I can't make those wooden dolls that the big-headed prince made. You're a system created by the heavenly Tao, but you can't even compare to a big-headed prince. Meg was a little disdainful. Humph. Who says the system can't compare to him? That's just a one-time use toy made from wood. Every time I replace a crystal, I can only throw 2 punches. It's expensive to make, but it doesn't have much practical effect. The system disdains making things like that. The system's voice was tinged with disdain. You make it sound like you can make something better. Meg was also disdainful. Isn't that to be expected? Micronucleus power coupled with phase transfer armor and a railgun. If you encounter a wooden doll like that, you only need 1 shot to take care of it. The system was extremely unconvinced. Holy shit. System, you can really make this thing. Meg's eyes suddenly lit up. Wasn't this the fucking standard of a Gundam? This isn't for sale, so don't even think about it. Just focus on making your cake. You're the man who's going to become the god of cookery, so do your best. The system said leisurely before its voice disappeared. Father, is the ice cream cake delicious? Amy interrupted Meg's thoughts. Chapter 764. This palace banquet is really unexpected. I didn't think that someone would be able to snatch the Best Dish award from Grandmaster Bellman. Shouldn't the chef who won the Best Dish award be the one who refused His Majesty's invitation and gave up on the position of assistant manager of the royal kitchen? Is there something wrong with that guy's head? How could he give up on such an opportunity? Once Bellman leaves in a few years, he'll become the manager of the royal kitchen. In the royal kitchen, the chefs who had yet to leave were chatting among themselves as they tidied up their things. Even though they didn't win the Best Dish award as usual, compared to the past banquets, there were a lot more chefs who would talk about it for an entire year. That chef by the name of Meg was like a dark horse who had completely stirred up the waters of the royal kitchen. Legends about him would most likely continue to linger for many years to come. That guy must know that he's no match for Master, so he didn't dare to enter the royal kitchen, the chubby chef beside Bellman said with a confident expression. However, none of the disciples around Bellman echoed his words. Instead, complex and dejected expressions appeared on their faces. A young boy looked at Bellman, who was tidying up his tools, and asked in a timid manner, "Master, what do you think of this?" Bellman slowly closed the lid of the box, and a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the sky. He's a true chef. Opening a restaurant is such a wonderful thing. There are so many customers coming and going every day. Perhaps this is the true reason why he's able to create so many different dishes. Father, what do we need to do today? Meg and Amy returned to the second prince's manor, and Amy immediately turned to Meg with an expectant look on her face. Meg thought about it for a moment before replying with a smile, "There's nothing else to do today, so Amy, why don't you accompany me to make some ice cream cake?" Ice cream cake. Amy looked at Meg with a perplexed expression. Wasn't ice cream just ice cream? What was a cake? Let's go. You'll find out soon enough. Meg smiled as he carried Amy in his arms. Then, he asked the housekeeper to move everything back and arrange a small, clean kitchen for him. The steward didn't know what had happened in the main hall, but he knew that Meg had won the best dish in the palace banquet and was even rewarded by His Majesty. He was the second prince and even His Majesty's favorite chef, so naturally, he had to curry favor with him. He immediately went to make arrangements according to Meg's request. The news of Meg winning the Best Dish award quickly spread to the kitchen of the second prince's residence. Naturally, it caused quite a commotion. Chapter 765. Autumn had already set in, and the wild grass that had grown recklessly between the streets and the dilapidated walls had already withered and turned yellow. However, by next spring, these wild grass would grow even more luxuriantly. Most of the memorial archway with the words 5th Street engraved upon it had already collapsed. A black cat was curled up in a crevice of the memorial archway, licking its wet fur. It suddenly raised its head to look into the distance, and its green eyes lit up as if it had seen something that was very dear to it. On the street, an elf in a long white dress was slowly making her way over. The torrential rain falling upon her body seemed to have suddenly become gentle, and the faint golden light emanating from her body seemed to possess some kind of mystical power. All of the rainwater silently slipped past the light, and none of it landed on her body. With each and every step she took, a tender green leaf would appear beneath her feet. Even though the road was extremely muddy, her pair of elegant white shoes were still as pristine and flawless as ever. Her silver hair, which almost reached her calves, swayed in the gentle breeze, and a calm expression appeared on her exquisitely beautiful face. The faint golden light emanating from her body illuminated the surrounding darkness, making her appear as if she were a celestial being. Irina stopped in her tracks, and her gaze fell upon the black cat beneath the memorial archway. Her brows furrowed slightly as she raised a hand, and a large leaf landed on the memorial archway, just in time to block the leaking rainwater. Meow, the black cat poked its head out and meowed at Irina. Ha, our princess sure is kind. A cold and sinister voice sounded from within the darkness, and a tall and burly man in a black robe slowly strode out from the darkness. With each and every step he took, muddy water would splash up into the air. All of a sudden, countless people in black appeared on the seemingly empty street. Their black robes covered their entire bodies, and no one could see their original faces. Their gleaming weapons reflected a chilling light when the lightning flashed past, and they slowly walked toward Irina from all directions without making any noise. Their powerful killing intent was as if it had materialized, and they made no attempt to conceal it as they aimed their killing intent directly at Irina. Irina didn't appear to be flustered in the slightest. She looked on calmly at the approaching black-robed man, and a mocking smile appeared on her face as she said, "Do you think this rag can hide your ugly face, Gajeel?" The black-robed man stopped in his tracks as he looked at Irina with a smile, and said, "What does that have to do with anything? It's enough as long as my face is covered." Tomorrow morning, news of the elven princess' tragic death on the streets of Rodu will spread across the entire continent, and the ones who killed her were a bunch of black-robed men of unknown origins. That's right, it's enough as long as they're human. The group of black-clothed men also laughed out loud, as if they had heard something funny. Their eyes flickered with light in the darkness. Irina glanced at the black-clothed people standing in the front row and frowned. "Demons, orcs, trolls, you're really in cahoots. It seems like you're ready to start a second racial war." Gajeel stretched his neck as a cold smile appeared on his face. The Norland continent's tradition is that the weak humans and elves have no right to occupy such a vast territory. You should just play the role of food and toys. That's the way things should be. That's right. After all, powerful races like you have to gather 12 of them before you dare to find trouble with a weak elf like me. Irina nodded with a mocking smile. Ha, Alex was just as stubborn as you were back in the day. However, we're not going to let you live this time. Gajeel's voice was tinged with rage. Irina's expression darkened slightly upon hearing this, and she asked in a grim voice, "Who else was involved in that incident aside from you? Perhaps you'll never imagine that the mastermind behind that incident wasn't us. Instead, it was our favorite prince, His Highness. However, what he wanted to do was exactly the same as what we wanted to do, so we willingly sacrificed ourselves for him and got rid of Alex." Gajil's voice was tinged with excitement, and even his hand was trembling slightly. So it really was him. Irina wasn't all that surprised, but at the very least, this confirmed her suspicions. Thinking back to the letters that Josh had written to her regarding the search for Meg and Amy, the disgust in her heart intensified. Of course, Josh will also be blamed for what happened today, and will announce it to the world along with what happened 3 years ago. His reputation will be completely destroyed, and the alliance between humans and elves will cease to exist. It's a pity that you won't get the chance to witness a true golden age. Slaughter is such a fun thing to do. The Norland continent has been silent for over 100 years, and it's time for a reshuffle. Weak races should prostrate themselves on the ground while we stand at the top of the entire continent. Gajil's voice was filled with madness, and his red eyes were like 2 balls of flames in the darkness. "Looks like Josh has also fallen out with you too." A contemplative look appeared on Irina's face. Humans have always been so short-sighted. They'll do anything to achieve their goals, but they'll never consider their own race, Gajil said with a smile. "Looks like you're working with someone else this time." Irina's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she had already figured out something. "You don't need to know that. I'm worried that I'm going to die from talking too much to you, so you can go and die." Gajil raised his left hand before swiping it downward. The rainwater was sliced in half, and several tens of sharp arrows hurtled toward them from the distance. The sharp arrowheads were covered in green venom. An orc rushed toward them in large strides, and his body abruptly grew taller. His bulging muscles threatened to burst open his loose black robe, and he raised a massive iron staff that was as thick as an arm above his head before bringing it crashing down toward Irina. Countless vines suddenly erupted from the ground before binding around Irina's legs and body. Some of them transformed into poisonous tongues and sharp spikes that hurtled toward Irina in a frenzy. Ding! A notification sounded from the freezer, and Meg and Amy's eyes lit up in unison. "Father, Father, it's done. The ice cream cake is done." Amy, who had a speck of white cream on her nose, clapped her little hands in elation. This was the dish she had been waiting for the longest time, but she was confident that it would be an extremely delicious dish. "All right, let me take out the strawberry ice cream cake," Meg said with a smile as he pulled open the freezer's door. Ding! Important notification. Would you like to purchase emergency information for a fee? Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "System, have you gone crazy from thinking about money? You're even selling emergency information." Meg pursed his lips in disdain. Amy was right in front of him, so what emergency information could she possibly have? The elven princess is in danger. Death rate, 100%. Chapter 766. What? Meg's hands trembled, and he almost dropped the cake in his hand. Princess Irina is in grave danger. This information is priced at 10 dragon coins. If the host feels, deduct it yourself. Where is she now? What happened? Meg cut off the system's words with a tense and serious expression. 10 dragon coins have been deducted. Princess Irina is currently located on the 5th Street, and she's currently under attack. Based on the strength of both sides, the probability of her death is 100%. The system's elated voice sounded. The 5th Street. Meg's heart jolted upon hearing this. He was naturally no stranger to this place. On that rainy night 3 years ago, Alex had been surrounded and killed there. The memory of that night flashed through his mind. And now, Irina was also being attacked on the second street. Was the incident from 3 years ago going to repeat itself? Meg's heart began to race. It smells so good. There's a cake wrapped in ice cream, and there are cute little strawberries on top. It looks so delicious. Amy looked at the ice cream cake in Meg's hand with elation on her face. Meg placed the cake on the table before turning to Amy with a serious expression. Amy, I have something very important to attend to, but I can't let anyone know about it. Stay here and eat your cake, then use magic to conjure up another father like last time. He'll stay here and eat the cake with you, alright? Amy looked at the anxious Meg. This was the first time she had seen such an expression on her father's face. Even though she didn't know what it was, she knew that it had to be something very important. She nodded obediently, and said, "All right, go ahead, father. Amy will stay here and wait for you to come back." He waved his wand, and a Meg appeared beside Meg. Even the clothes he was wearing were identical, and there was a smile on his face. Good girl. Meg glanced at the Meg that was created by magic. If he didn't enter the room, he would be able to pass off as the real Meg. He reached out his hand and closed the window halfway. Then, he opened the door and looked around. After that, he dashed out of the room and nimbly flipped over the courtyard wall. After jumping over several high walls, he successfully left the second prince's residence. Heavy rain poured down, hitting his face painfully. Not a single pedestrian could be seen on the pitch-black street. System, I want to use that opportunity. Meg wiped the water off his face and ran in a certain direction. At the same time, he said calmly in his heart. Host, there is only one chance to return to your peak state. This may be your only chance to save your life. Are you sure you want to use it now? The system asked seriously. If one day, Amy finds out that I had a chance to save her mother, but gave it up because I wanted to save my own life, she'll definitely hate me. A gentle smile appeared on Meg's face as he said, I told her that I was going to bring her mother back. Why would I lie to her? It's not like it's you. The system was silent for a moment before issuing a stern warning. Host, please prepare yourself. You will need 3 seconds to return to your peak state, and the duration will be 10 minutes. Please make sure to return to a safe location before the onset of your feeble state. 3 seconds. Meg was a little surprised by the system's efficiency. However, before Meg had a chance to think any further, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky and struck Meg's body with a resounding boom. That's right, it was a bolt of lightning. Meg had never seen a bolt of lightning of different colors that could be twisted into a single bolt of lightning before crashing down from the sky with such unerring accuracy. Boom! Meg felt as if a bomb had exploded right next to his ear, leaving only a buzzing sound in his ears. Following that, a numbing sensation quickly spread throughout his body. His muscles felt as if they had been forcibly torn apart before being reconstructed amidst the lightning. This process was obviously much more painful than the previous 2 electric shocks. It was even more terrifying than the blood exchange. It was as if all the cells in his body had been reconstructed. This excruciating feeling almost made Meg faint. Ding! Physical peak state has been successfully activated. The 10-minute countdown begins. When the system's voice rang out, Meg felt as if a century had passed. The numbing sensation and pain all over his body disappeared at the same time, causing him to grin a little uncomfortably. It's over. Meg was stunned for a moment. He looked down at his clothes that had completely disappeared from his body and hurriedly covered his private parts with his hands. The torrential rain washed away the black ash left behind by the lightning strike. Meg finally felt the powerful feedback from his body. It was as if there was an endless amount of power wreaking havoc in his body. In front of this power, a 5th-tier strength was as fragile as a baby. So this is the power of a 10th tier knight at the pinnacle. Meg clenched his fists. He felt as if he could shatter a city wall with a single punch. This was a power that couldn't be explained by science. System, give me a black robe and a mask. I'll put them on. Meg stood with his back against the wall. He really didn't have the courage to run around naked on the streets of Rodu. The black robe has been delivered. The system can provide over 1,000 masks for the host to choose from. Among them, Meg put on a black robe, and a series of strange masks appeared in his mind at the same time. I'll take the third black one. Meg only took a quick glance at it before coming to a decision. Ding! The mask has been delivered. 15 dragon coins have been deducted. Meg pulled the mask from the back of his head to the front, and it fit his face very well. He rushed forward like an arrow and instantly appeared over 100 meters away. Only then did he hear the sound of something hurtling through the air behind him. Hang in there, Irina. You won't be alone this time. Meg didn't stop in the slightest as he rushed toward the 5th Street in the northern part of the city like a ghost. System, do you work in logistics? The system is a gourmet system. Logistics is 100 dragon coins. Logistics is naturally part of the system's job. If the host has left something at home and needs help, the system is more than happy to oblige. It can be delivered within 5 minutes within the Norland continent. The system's voice was filled with a hint of flattery. Give me Alex's sword, Meg said calmly. Host. Logistics is the delivery of goods. The goods must belong to the host. Only then can the system deliver them. However, you're asking the system to steal them. That's against the system's principles and beyond the scope of our services, the system said in a serious voice. System, who's the owner of that sword? Meg Alex. Then who am I? Shin Meg Alex, seeing as that sword belongs to me, is it still within the logic of logistics for me to ask you to give me something that belongs to me? Meg asked before adding, do it or leave it. I'll do it. The system was silent for a moment before replying in a feeble voice. Your Highness, our scouts have reported that Princess Irina seems to have been attacked on the 2nd Street. Chapter 767. What? The book in Josh's hand slipped to the ground, and a panicked look appeared on his face as he grabbed the man by the collar. What's going on? Your Highness. Your Highness, according to your instructions, the scouts followed Princess Irina's trail and discovered her tracks near the 5th Street. Immediately afterward, we lost contact with 3 groups of scouts, and one of them also lost contact with the princess after reporting that she was attacked. Currently, more scouts are converging there, and the exact situation is unknown. The man in black replied in a trembling voice. The 5th Street. Josh pushed the man aside before quickly making his way out of the room. Prepare the griffins and order the guards to come with me to the 5th Street. Yes. The man hurriedly rushed out of the room. Very quickly, a black griffin rose up from the second prince's residence, flapping its wings and flying away. 2 teams of black-clothed men appeared from the back door, galloping wildly toward the north of the city in the rainy night. Tonight's rain is just as satisfying as it was 3 years ago. In a certain pavilion in Rodu, a tall and broad figure stood in front of the window, looking out at the pouring rain as he took a sip of wine with a faint smile on his face. It was as if the entire world had forgotten about the 5th Street. The black cat was curled up in a corner of the dilapidated archway with its black fur standing on end. Its body was hunched over, and its blue eyes were filled with horror as it looked at the beautiful elf in the distance. The rain was falling onto the green leaf on its head, but not a single drop of rain fell. The sharp arrow had already reached Irina, and a sinister smile appeared on the orc's face. It was as if he could already envision the scene of his iron staff crushing Irina's head. The vines that had erupted from the ground were like vipers as they converged toward her legs. Within the darkness, a group of heavy cavalry began to charge toward her. The hooves of the unicorn splashed through the water in unison, and the tips of their lances shimmered with a cold light under the flashes of lightning. Everything was cold and merciless, sealing off all avenues of escape for Irina. A cruel smile appeared on Gijil's face under his black mask. He had been waiting for this day for many years. Many years ago, Alex and Irina had wreaked havoc on the continent, bringing him immense humiliation. Alex was already dead, and now, Irina was also going to die. This was going to be a wonderful night. Back when Irina and Alex were roaming the continent, she hadn't fought many battles. Even though she had already become a 10th-tier magic caster, not many people knew just how powerful she truly was. She's even given up on resisting. Without Alex's eyes, she's just a pretty face's face. Gijil pursed his lips with disdain. It seemed that the three races had overestimated Irina by deploying 6 10th-tier powerful beings. According to the news from the Elven race, Irina had most likely sustained severe injuries 3 years ago, resulting in a massive drop in her cultivation base. Even though her slaying of Schubert had created quite a stir on the continent, it now appeared that Schubert was most likely so old that he couldn't even hold his wand properly anymore. Countless pairs of eyes looked on in the darkness, and it was very likely that the history of the Norland continent was going to be rewritten on this night. The humans who had lost Alex and the elves who had lost Irina were going to become slaves and food for the other races again in the future. Right at this moment, Irina raised her left hand. The torrential downpour instantly ceased, and raindrops that were around the size of soybeans began to hover in midair. The string of arrows suddenly stopped, and the orc still had a sinister smile on his face as black vines wound around her legs. Everything was like a picture that had suddenly stopped. In the faint golden light, that slender jade hand seemed to have been carved out of pure jade, fair and transparent. A golden staff that was taller than a grown man appeared in Irina's right hand. Irina's expression was still as calm and holy as ever, and she said in a calm voice, "Holy light, heed my call and cleanse all impurities." Dazzling holy light began to appear at the tip of her staff, making it as dazzling as the sun. Beams of golden holy light pierced through the suspended raindrops, and all of the raindrops seemed to have turned golden as they began to radiate scintillating light. They were like golden swords that pierced outward, and even the darkness was forced to give way to them. Crap! Gijil's expression abruptly changed as a black shield appeared in front of him, and he hurtled back in retreat at the same time. All of the other black-robed figures also unleashed defensive measures, and their expressions changed slightly. The frozen scene started moving again at this moment. The string of arrows that were hurtling toward them were struck by a beam of holy light, and were instantly reduced to dust. The holy light continued onward, piercing through the glabella of a demon archer in the distance. The vines that had emerged from the ground were also illuminated by the holy light, and melted away like snow. Arg! A forest troll in the distance immediately jumped up and let loose a blood-curdling cry, but its legs had already disappeared. The intertwining holy light fell upon the body of a beast-man wielding a metal staff, and his soft armor, which had been constructed from the hide of a 9th-tier magic beast, was instantly sliced into countless shards. Blood gushed forth from the tiny intersecting wounds, and the massive metal staff was stained with rust. Layers of rust began to peel off from the staff, leaving behind a trail of metal shards on the ground. The holy light then fell upon the spear-wielding heavy cavalrymen who were charging toward Irina. Their heavy armor, which was capable of withstanding 7th-tier attacks, was instantly riddled with countless cracks, and they were reduced to minced meat before they could even reach Irina. Irina withdrew her left hand before smashing her staff into the beastman's face. Bam! The beastman was sent flying with blood all over his body, and he crashed heavily into a pile of rubble, where he was buried under inky black rocks, completely dead. The remaining holy light wreaked havoc, and left some wounds on the bodies of the black-clothed men. The torrential rain continued to pour down on the Fifth Street, but it suddenly became much quieter. Only the anguished wails of the forest troll with its broken legs and heavy panting could be heard. The smell of blood in the air couldn't be concealed even by the torrential rain. In a short span of time, a team of heavy cavalrymen and a 10th-tier beastman had died a violent death. The black-clothed men's expressions had already changed as they looked at Irina. This incomparably beautiful elf was actually so brutal when it came to killing people. Furthermore, her strength was much greater than they had previously estimated. Irina smiled with a hint of mockery, and said, "You might have misunderstood something. Back then, Alex didn't want me to fight, not because I was too weak, but because I was too heavy-handed, and it was easy for me to kill people. Furthermore, if I wanted to leave, which one of you could stop me? Irina, you've indeed exceeded my expectations. However, even Alex ended up in our hands. Do you think we'll let you leave alive?" Chapter 768. Everyone, we don't have much time left. Kill her for the sake of the Alliance. Gajeel tore off his black robe, and his eyes turned crimson. His tall and burly body began to swell as a series of black spikes that resembled the fur of a wild boar appeared on his back. The hair on his head also became a series of towering spikes, and he opened his mouth to reveal a pair of sharp fangs. He was like a humanoid wild boar as he charged toward Irina while wielding a massive saber that was close to 2 meters in length. For the Alliance. A forest troll that was over 5 meters tall stood up, and his black robe was instantly torn into countless shreds. Countless tiny black vortexes appeared on his moss-covered body, instantly reducing all of the withered plants to ashes. Almost all of the plants within a radius of several kilometers died as wisps of dark green aura surged into those vortexes. He was wielding a massive stone staff as he charged toward Irina. The smell of blood is truly intoxicating. The projection of a massive bat appeared behind one of the vampires, and the black-robed man extended a deathly pale hand. He slit his sharp finger across his wrist, and blood gushed forth before falling into a massive magic formation in front of him. He then yelled in a deranged manner, "I offer my blood to the Blood Patriarch and invite him to descend." Dazzling red light erupted from the blood-stained formation, and all of the blood and flesh on the ground surged toward the formation in a frenzy as if they were being drawn toward it. The blood began to bubble and bubble as if it had been heated to a boiling point. A sinister aura proliferated in all directions, and a crimson hand reached out from the center of the formation, following which a headless crimson corpse slowly crawled out of the pool of blood. It paused momentarily before crouching down and searching through the blood formation, upon which it pulled out a bloody head and attached it to its own neck. It then turned toward Irina with its bulging eyes, and licked its lips before disappearing on the spot. The remaining beast-man let loose an enraged roar as he charged toward Irina with a massive staff in his hand. He transformed into a half-ape man as he ran, and each of his strides covered 5 to 6 meters before crashing to the ground with a resounding boom, leaving a massive crater in the ground. The remaining forest troll pressed its hands and feet into the ground while chanting an incantation. The color of the soil changed from brown to grayish-white, and the power that it had gathered transformed into a green ribbon that fell onto another forest troll that was charging toward Irina. Almost at the exact same moment, the 5 10th-tier powerful beings unleashed attacks on Irina. "It's a pity that I didn't tell Amy that I'm her mother." Irina looked at the grayish-black magic formation with a dejected expression. She knew that she wouldn't be able to break through this barrier in a short period of time. At the very least, before the attacks that of the beastman's attacks were, she would be unable to do so. However, he should be able to take good care of her. After all, the food he cooks is so delicious. A smile appeared on Irina's face again. There was probably nothing that made her happier than meeting him again and seeing Amy grow up. Even though it was a little regrettable, she was still going to drag these guys down with her. Irina raised the staff in her hand and chanted in a loud voice, "Holy light, heed my call and purify the filth of this world." Holy light lit up again, and a beam of holy light as thick as an arm shot forward. A mangled crimson figure was forced out of the darkness and exposed to the holy light. Arg! A blood-curdling cry rang out alongside the sizzling sound of corrosion. The blood patriarch that had been summoned was unable to escape from the holy light. It was as if a chain of light had bound him, and no matter how much he struggled, his flesh and blood were being corroded at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye. Arg! No! At the same time, the body of the vampire that had summoned the blood patriarch also began to fester, and he knelt to the ground as he screamed and struggled. Bam! At the same time that Irina released her holy light, Gajiel also appeared before her and swept his 2-meter-long saber toward Irina in an attempt to slice her in half. Irina raised her staff in front of her, but she was still sent flying by the saber before crashing into the dilapidated memorial arch 5 or 6 meters away. Many fine cracks appeared on the boulder behind her, and Irina's face paled as blood trickled down from the corners of her lips. At the same time, the half-ape orc descended from the sky with his staff in hand, crashing down toward Irina. A spell formation lit up beneath Irina's feet, and golden light flashed as she appeared around 10 meters away. Boom! The ruins of the memorial archway turned into a pile of sand and stone. Where the stick landed, there was a huge pit that was several meters deep. Irina stumbled slightly as a stone pillar that was as thick as a water bucket came crashing down toward her again. The 5-meter-tall troll was like a gargantuan Buddha with a pair of grayish-white eyes on its mossy face. A teleportation spell formation lit up beneath Irina's feet again, and she disappeared in the instant before the stone pillar crashed into the ground. The stone pillar crashed to the ground with a resounding boom, causing the remaining buildings to collapse like a clap of thunder on a rainy night. Golden light flashed again, and Irina appeared above the troll's head. She held her staff with both hands and brought it down viciously upon the troll's head. Bam! A massive crater appeared in the troll's head, and a series of cracks began to spread downward from its head. The 5-meter-tall creature swayed unsteadily before collapsing to the ground with a resounding boom. Right at this moment, a metal staff struck Irina's lower back viciously from behind, and the sound of bones breaking rang out alongside a dull thump. Irina was still in midair, and she was sent flying like a broken-winged bird. Just before she crashed into the grayish-black barrier, she managed to conjure up a spherical magic barrier with great difficulty. A string of magic ripples appeared on the barrier as she crashed into it, and she fell feebly to the ground. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. As soon as she landed, countless vines instantly wrapped themselves around the magic barrier like giant pythons that had latched onto their prey. The vines tightened in a frenzy, and the light on the magic barrier began to flicker as its shape became slightly warped. 3 10th-tier creatures. That's not too bad of a deal. Irina lay within the magic barrier with a small black ball in her hand. A mocking smile appeared on her face at the sight of Gajiel and the orcs charging toward her. Green light was surging into her body in a frenzy from the heart-shaped necklace on her chest. However, no matter how efficient her self-regenerative abilities were, there was no way that she could recover her combat prowess right away, and her magic barrier was already on the verge of collapse. I've changed my mind now. Gajiel raised his saber as he looked at Irina with a sinister smile, and said, "After I kill you, I'll strip you naked and hang you on the city walls of Rodu. After that, the Roth Empire will suffer the wrath of the elven race. Who dares to touch my woman?" Chapter 769. Ding! A black claymore flew through the air, slicing through all of the vines that had wrapped around the magic barrier before nailing itself firmly to the ground. Tian! Tian Du! Gajeel stared at the black claymore and that deep voice, and the horror that had been lurking deep within his heart surged forth like a tidal wave. Madness took hold of his heart, and the hand that was holding his saber began to tremble uncontrollably. Arg! The forest troll immediately withdrew all of its vines and let loose a howl of anguish as it turned toward the street with horror in its eyes. The orc also wore a horrified expression as he shook his head and took a couple of steps backward. No. Impossible. He died 3 years ago. There's no way he's still alive. Meg Alex was a name that had once resounded throughout the entire Norland continent, and it was almost synonymous with invincibility. The most powerful orc warriors had been slain by his sword, and even the most ferocious demons could only submit to him with their tails between their legs. Even giant dragons that soared through the heavens had been slain by his sword. This was a name that struck fear into the hearts of all powerful beings in the Norland continent, and it was like a sharp sword that was hanging over their heads. Thankfully, he had died 3 years ago. 3 years ago, they had witnessed his fall on the 5th Street with their very own eyes. As participants in the battle, they knew that Alex had half of his bones broken, all of his tendons severed, and he had been cursed by magic. Even if he didn't die, he would be a cripple for the rest of his life. However, he had appeared again. Tian-Du, the sword that only Alex could wield, had reappeared, and it seemed to be heralding the return of that man. The boundless horror they were experiencing was even more chilling than the autumn rain. That night, a dozen or so 10th-tier powerful beings had surrounded him, but he had killed half of them. It was truly a stroke of luck that they had managed to survive. The gruesome scenes of that night were still vivid in their minds. Even though they had made the most thorough preparations and gathered a dozen or so 10th-tier powerful beings, they had still only been able to defeat him after paying a heavy price. Thinking back to the events that had transpired, Gajeel felt that if it hadn't been for the half-elf infant, all of them would have most likely died there. Irina looked at the sword, and her hand that was holding the small black ball slowly loosened. Apart from being pleasantly surprised, she was also a little more scrutinizing. She muttered to herself, "I haven't seen him for 3 years, and he even knows how to say such things. Looks like I have to properly investigate who he has met during these 3 years. Furthermore, has his strength recovered? Kill her first. Then we'll kill Alex together. It's impossible for him to regain his peak strength." Gajeel did his best to calm himself down as he roared, and he swung his trembling saber toward Irina again. The orc and troll also calmed down. The troll let out a roar, and countless branches turned into glowing spears. The orc's fur suddenly turned bright red, and he madly rushed towards Irina. Even if Alex hadn't died, there was no way that he could have recovered to the peak of his powers. As long as Irina died, the 3 of them would still have a chance to kill him. Right at this moment, a black figure appeared on the street over 100 meters away. In the next instant, a hand grabbed onto the Tian-Du sword that was standing in front of Irina, and a black-robed man had already positioned himself in front of Irina. Only then did the sound of air being torn apart rang out. "Looks like you have a death wish." Meg glanced at Gajeel before swinging his heavy sword through the air. The 2-meter-long saber that was burning with scorching red flames stained the entire sky red, and it seemed to hold the absolute advantage in the face of the inky black heavy sword. However, the inky black heavy sword was extremely fast, and even though it wasn't all that sharp, it was still able to slice through the space around it. The saber and the sword clashed, and a crisp sound akin to that of metal striking stone rang out. Contrary to Gajeel's expectations, the red saber was snapped in half, and a half-meter-long section of it flew through the air before nailing itself onto a wall over 100 meters away. Meanwhile, the remaining half of the saber in Gajeel's hand was shattered into countless pieces, and countless cracks appeared on its surface before it fell to the ground. Meg turned to the side and swung his heavy sword through the air. All of the spear-like tree branches that were hurtling toward him were instantly reduced to sawdust, and not a single one of them was able to break through his defenses. Die, Alex! The orc that had transformed into a giant red ape let loose an enraged roar, and he leaped high into the air before swinging his staff down toward Alex. Aside from the fact that orcs had dark green skin, the biggest difference between orcs and humans was that orcs could enter a berserk state and even transform into ferocious beasts for a short period of time. The reason why the orcs were able to dominate the Norland continent was because of their immense strength. They didn't need any techniques, and their strength would increase by hundreds or even thousands of times as they progressed. After that, they would be able to crush their opponents into mincemeat with unstoppable force. Their direct and unyielding battle style was rather similar to orcs' personalities. Cade was the great elder of the Red Ape tribe, and he was one of the 10 great elders of the orc race. Even though he was ranked at the bottom, his combat prowess was still extremely powerful. 3 years ago, he hadn't witnessed Alex's power in person, and had only heard about him from legends. However, on that night, he had witnessed one 10th tier powerhouse after another being slain by that man. This man, who had been declared to be permanently crippled and had died in a fire, had appeared again. However, he had no choice. Today's mission would determine the future of the entire Red Ape tribe. If he were to die here today, the Red Ape tribe would still remain one of the 10 great tribes for the next 500 years. As such, he could die, but he didn't want to. Cade's black staff was as thick as an arm, leaving a trail of afterimages in its wake. It appeared to be an ordinary staff, but even the air itself seemed to have caved in, creating a series of inky black rifts. There weren't many 10th tier powerhouses on the Norland continent. If a tribe had a dozen 10th tier powerhouses, then it could be considered a powerful tribe. Among them, most of them were 5th tier giant dragons. As such, giant dragons ruled over dragon islands and looked down upon all other tribes. Even the elven race had less than 10 10th tier magic casters. As for the weakest goblins and dwarves, who focused on forging and construction, they had less than 5 10th tier powerhouses. 10th tier powerhouses were widely acknowledged as the pinnacle of power on the Norland continent. This staff strike was Cade's most powerful one, and it was the highest level of berserk state. He had abandoned all flashy techniques, and was only left with the purest explosive power. This staff strike seemed to be able to crush the heavens. Piss off. Meg looked up at Cade before swinging the black heavy sword in his hand through the air. It was also a simple sword strike. There was no sharp tip of the sword, nor was there a sharp blade. Instead, the body of the sword was engraved with ancient patterns, and it flew through the air horizontally. The thick and sturdy staff was bent at a strange angle, and sparks flew in all directions as it was unable to withstand the immense force of the strike. The broad and flat blade of the sword struck Cade's chest without slowing down in the slightest, and his furry chest caved in with a resounding thump. A dull thump rang out, as if the sword had struck leather. The blood-curdling cries came to an abrupt halt. Chapter 770. The royal palace in the storm was like a giant beast lurking in the dark. Lights flickered in the storm and strong winds, and the female servants were struggling to walk along the walls of the corridor, trying their best to maintain the normal operation of the royal palace where the highest authority of the Roth Empire resided. At this moment, on the top floor of the tallest hall in the depths of the palace, a figure was standing by the window, looking toward the north of the city. The oil lamp with a windproof lampshade swayed slightly, reflecting the king's majestic face and the dark shadow behind him. Alex has appeared. Judging from the energy waves, he's probably not any weaker than when he was at his peak. The figure behind him that was completely hidden in the darkness spoke. His hoarse voice couldn't hide his surprise. Andre's expression darkened slightly. He frowned and said, "He really didn't die, but how did he recover? You said that even if he didn't die, he would only be a cripple for the rest of his life. The black shadow was silent for a while. "Do you need me to go and take a look?" "No need. If those fools don't have any backup plans, they'll have to swallow the fact that 6 10th-tier powerhouses died in Rodu. How delightful would that be?" Andre shook his head slightly. The black shadow pondered, and said, "But Sean is also involved in this matter. If Alex is indeed still alive and has recovered to his peak state, Josh might also be in trouble." The corners of Andre's mouth curled up as he sneered. They brought this trouble upon themselves. "In order to inherit the throne, the two of them have done a lot of things behind my back. Although I have seen it all, it's not time for me to die yet. When necessary, I should give them a warning and let them know who is the true master of the Empire. I've been the king for so many years, and let the Roth Empire grow steadily. I'm not paving the way for them. Only I have the right to walk this path. If Alex isn't dead, then let him live. He's a human, after all, isn't he?" The rain seemed to have become heavier, and shrouded the palace like a curtain of water. That black shadow didn't reply, and Andre didn't say anything else. He held the railing with both hands, and his deep eyes were still looking toward the north of the city, as if he was waiting for something. The wind forest, the tree of life, which had always been calm and peaceful, suddenly erupted with green light. Green light rose from the hole in the tree, and then condensed into a beam of light that streaked across the sky and flew toward the west. The elves all walked out of the tree holes and houses, and looked up with shock and bewilderment. "Irina." In a quiet tree hole, the elven queen opened her eyes, revealing a trace of concern and nervousness. In the blink of an eye, she appeared on the top of the tree. Looking at the wisps of green light rising from the tree of life, her expression was somewhat solemn. How could this be? In the starry sky cave, Helena, Elven, Ellen the sky, Helena's in the sky. Every star in the starry sky represented an elf. The brightest star was the Elven Queen, and the star that represented Irina was the second brightest star in the starry sky. But now, the originally dazzling star had become very dim, as if it would be annihilated at any time. Helena turned toward the tree of life, and her brows furrowed even more tightly. Something like this had only happened 3 years ago. At that time, Irina had returned to the wind forest, and suffered from severe bleeding during labor. She had almost lost her life, and only managed to survive under the protection of the Tree of Life. She had rested for a full 3 years before emerging from the mountain cave. Now, Irina was tens of thousands of kilometers away in Rodu, and the Tree of Life was acting strangely. Something had most likely happened to her, and she was in an extremely perilous situation. Irina, that damned woman, is finally going to die. An ecstatic expression appeared on Heidi's face at the sight of the flickering star. Helena looked down at the hunchbacked Heidi, and a dangerous light flashed through her eyes as she asked in a cold voice, "What did you do?" Heidi felt as if her entire body had been sealed in ice. Her legs gave out from under her, and she fell to her knees involuntarily. She was a little horrified and deranged as she said, "Mistress, I only delivered a letter to her. That bitch is far too detestable. She has no respect for you, and she even killed Master Houston. She deserves to die." Helena extended a hand toward Heidi, and Heidi's neck seemed to have been gripped by a giant invisible hand. She was slowly lifted into the air until she was at the same height as the platform. She looked at her with a cold expression as she asked, "You colluded with a foreign race to kill Irina?" Heidi's face had turned deathly pale, but she was still staring at Helena with a deranged expression as she said, "Mistress, I did all of this for you. If Irina dies, you can make whoever you want the princess. When that time comes, the entire elven race will kneel at your feet. Now, she's going to die. Shut up." A loud slap rang out within the cave, and Heidi's head was almost sent flying. She twisted her neck with a look of bewilderment and horror on her face. Helena's face was filled with rage as she yelled, "Do you know what Irina represents? She's the hope of the elven race for the next 1,000 years. No elf can replace her, and no elf can compare to her. How dare you collude with a foreign race to kill her? Do you want to become a sinner of the entire elven race?" Heidi's face was extremely pale, and she felt as if she were about to pass out from asphyxiation. However, what made her feel even more despair wasn't death. Instead, it was Helena's attitude. Heidi was willing to die for Mistress Helena, and she wasn't afraid of infamy. However, she could sense Helena's fury, and she was perplexed as she said, "But she never respected you, mistress. What I want is for the elven race to prosper. I want the elven race to be revered by all races on the Norland continent. It doesn't matter whether she respects me or not. Even if she wants to kill me, I'll keep her alive as she'll never allow any elf to be bullied by another race." Helena looked at Heidi with a cold expression before releasing her grip, and Heidi plummeted from a height of over 10 meters, breaking countless bones amid a dull thump. Helena looked up at the dim star with a cold expression and said, "If she dies, then you'll be buried with her. Your Highness, our scouts have reported that a third party has appeared on the 2nd Street, and the plan has been thwarted. It's most likely Alex." In a tall building, a black shadow flashed into the room and spoke in a grim voice. Ding! The golden cup in Sean's hand fell to the ground with a crisp clang, and began to spin on the floor. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.